be here. I love you all.
Hello and welcome to the Scannain Podcast, your weekly look at the world of film news, Irish and international. I'm Darren Mooney, joining me are...
Jay.
And Ronan.
So we're going to talk about what we normally talk about. We're going to talk about the top 10, the new releases, and the weekend film news. But let's start with what we normally do. So what have you watched since last we talked, Ronan?
I have gotten through a couple of things. I was away for a while, so not as many as I might have liked, but I was away in Paris, where I made it to the Cinémathèque Française. The pilgrimage site for film lovers, very much. One of the biggest film museums in the world.
Nice.
So the museum there is wonderful. It has lots of these sort of early cinema precursors, and you can actually play with the machines and see the sort of the rotating images that sort of gave the original ideas that eventually resulted in cinema towards the end of the 19th century. And there are these very, very old machines that you're actually able to play yourself, which is really, really cool. They've got a really good exhibition as well on Youssef Chahine, the Egyptian filmmaker, and like the detail there is incredible. They've got his silver bear that he won in Berlin, but also his staplers.
His staplers.
His staplers.
One of my favourite film.
Piece of memorabilia. Yeah.
It's just nice context, It's not just the big victories that count. It's every little hole you punch.
Staple that script together.
It's what really holds us together.
But I was very keen.
Filmmaking.
Stop it.
I was very keen to take in a movie while I was there, and I actually managed to get in two. They're running a Joan Crawford season at the moment. So I got in a double bill of When Ladies Meet from the 40s, which is a remake of an earlier 30s film. It's a really enjoyable, rip-roaring comedy where Crawford plays an author who is trying to deliver a successful new book. She's just switched publishers, and he's really keen to get her one direction in what she does with the story. Her old friend and would-be suitor, as it were, is very keen to have her go the other way, and she's torn between the men. It's this absolutely rip-roaring screwball antics going on all the time. Crawford is terrific, and Greer Garson is there as well as a character who gets pulled into the middle of it. It's very much staged, almost like a play. It's quite cinematic, but it's the structure is, there's a sort of 3 to 4 act, 4 clear scenes that you go through. One of them at a holiday home. Really smart dialogue. Anita Luce co-wrote the screenplay, and she's got a terrific way with words that, like, the screening was cracking up throughout the whole thing. It very much suffers from being a product of its time, where it has to end with two characters getting together who you spend most of the film thinking, well, he's a fucking dick.
That still happens in films.
Oh, yeah.
This is not a healthy relationship dynamic. But
you know the way sometimes you get Hollywood films of this period, they seem, we're talking Hays Code here still.
Yeah.
They know full well that this is the wrong thing to do, but this is what they have to do as a business. So you get that thing where literally in the final 30 seconds they get together and it feels like a complete cop-out because they know it is.
In some ways, though, I don't mind that when it's the last 30 seconds because it's almost a fuck you to the Hays Code in some ways.
It's kind of
it's
code
so obviously wrong.
This is clearly not the correct ending.
The end of the film ended 30 seconds ago if you want to do that.
But the real romance here is between Crawford and Greer Garson, who are just absolutely tearing the screen up together. They're having the best fun, mostly giving out about the men around them. It was an absolute riot.
Evergreen.
Yeah, absolutely. And right after that, then we had This Woman Is Dangerous from the 50s. This is very much kind of a late noir, playing off the big successes of noir in the preceding decades. It's not very good, I have to say. Crawford is a woman who is caught up in a crime ring. She is going blind, and it starts with us. It throws us right into the middle of this consultation where she's being told that your eyes are fading quicker than thought. She's like, really? How soon will they go? Within the next 2 weeks. And then suddenly
accurate.
People thought very slowly in the 50s.
Yeah.
And suddenly, apparently having been fine a minute ago, she can't see people in front of her. It's that kind of thing. It's very dodgy writing generally. But she does great work with the role. She gets catapulted into this plot that is really strange, where she falls in love with her eye doctor, who's the best in America, of course, naturally. All the while hearing with horror on the radio the antics of her boyfriend, who starts trying to track her down. There's some really enjoyable kind of excess going on here, but it's not much. I've read a couple of things about it. A lot of people suggesting it's one of Crawford's worst pictures.
Yeah. And she had a bit of a run at the end of her career of kind of dodgy sci-fi.
So it was not a sight for sore eyes.
It was not, certainly. But
try to remain optimistic.
Jesus,
wow,
that was a massive. That was bizarre.
Yeah.
But I'm impressed by the
I blindsided you by it.
Oi. Here we are.
Wow.
And then another thing I did actually was rewatch the same Varda short I watched last week, because on my Paris travels I took in some of the locations from her films, including the Rue de Guerre where she lived, and the street where the sort of largest of the caryatids, the so-called caryatids, was filmed. Just kind of a point of interest myself. I knew I'd be passing around there to take in the street she shot in, and kind of wondering if the context of the film would change having physically been in those places, because Varda is very much a filmmaker concerned with location and sort of lived experience of being in a particular place.
What a street means, what people mean.
Yeah. And a big part, especially like it's a 3-minute section at the end of the so-called caryatids, which is only 12 minutes long anyway, of this 3-story statue.
Yeah.
And she goes to great pains to explain how nobody knows what it is, nobody knows what it refers to, nobody knows why it was put there. It's just an ordinary residential building, but it's a very ornate decoration. There's a very funny shot in the film of people on all 3 stories like brushing a teen and taking care of this statue pride. Because it's a wonderful thing to have on your home and caring for it, even though they don't necessarily know what it was. And it was great to go back, and I took a photo and I was comparing it side by side to the film itself. Yeah. And a lot has changed around it. There are sort of shop fronts that have moved, like on the balconies themselves. Yeah. There's lettering and advertising, but it seems itself the caryatid to be in wonderful condition. That there's
it remains fixed as
life
changes
absolutely.
Around
there's this constancy that people continue to take very good care of it, and I don't think I managed to spot any of the other ones in the film, but there are loads of little architectural details around Paris that Varda captures so well in that film. It's a lovely little film. And she's got dozens more of those films that we still have to catch.
There may be more to come there in this segment.
In this very segment. We will be back. I also caught, speaking of Paris actually, this was after I came back, but I grabbed a movie, Godard's 2 or 3 Things I Know About Her, so I'm not very well watched on my Jean-Luc, but I've seen kind of the early big hits, Breathless and Contempt, say, and some of the more recent extremely experimental work like Goodbye to Language and this year's The Image Book, which is by far the worst film of the year. So that'll tell you how I feel about Godard usually. This is kind of an interesting halfway point. It's constantly interrogating everything about cinema, essentially, just digging into the ideas of language as representation and a continually evolving representation. It has these nice shots it keeps cutting away to of construction sites on the outskirts of Paris and playing with the idea of language as construction, the way that we constantly construct images of ourselves throughout. And if that sounds a bit boring, it is. It's only about 84 minutes long, but my God, it drags and drones. And I know there are a lot of people who are into this kind of thing, but I can't deal with this kind of philosophizing, especially when you consider the film is very much Godard setting out a sort of statement about the need to invent a new language for the modern world. This is something, a lot of people have discussed over the last couple of decades since modernism, really. And we do need new ways to frame our experience in a world that's shifting very quickly. But he does a lot of talking about that without actually doing anything, because the entire film is this it's a narrative about a woman who is asked by her husband to go into prostitution to fund their middle-class lifestyle.
That old chestnut.
Yeah, in an expanding capital of Paris. Fine, that could be interesting. The film doesn't spend any time with the plot itself, because it has all these scenes going on you can't often hear the characters talking. You hear Godard whispering thoughts about philosophy and films and
so very French in that way.
French. And I should say he's done this very well. I think Goodbye to Language is brilliant.
Yeah, it's in my top 10 years now.
Genius.
It's brilliant. The only essential 3D film, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
Forgotten Dreams?
I will repeat my previous thing.
Okay, all right.
He's very, very good at
Don't you mean Avatar, the highest grossing movie of all time?
I shall repeat my previous statement.
Godard is very, very good at doing that kind of truly inventive stuff, and that's what kind of annoyed me about this film. Now we have to, accept the context that I'm watching this 50 years after release, and maybe it was a bit more, shocking and surprising then, but I don't think so. There's one scene where it does a sort of almost Tree of Life style thing where it sort of zooms into the swirling bubbles in a coffee cup, and it begins to look a bit like a galaxy, and that was really fascinating. But that was 4 minutes out of 84, and the other 80 were a real struggle. He's just generally not a filmmaker. That's for me. He's
difficult though, and difficult deliberately.
Yes,
in a sense. He's a provocateur in the way that filmmakers, it's not cheap tricks in the sense that it's not the new modernist era of filmmakers constantly. Godard earned whatever he's earned over 5 or 6 decades making films and making a lot of films that are hugely respected and hugely influential. So it's not, he's earned the right to be a fucker and for you to annoy his films to annoy you in that way, and you might get a good one, you might get a crap one. I know people that go to bat for him hugely. I've only seen a handful of films, like 2 or 3, and I'm fascinated by him, but in a way that doesn't really make me desire to watch more. Although I probably will, and to some degree I probably should, just to go right, no or yes in that regard, as you said. But it's there's a lot of filmmakers that I haven't seen films from as well. So how much time do we have?
That's it.
There's a lot of films. So
they're fascinating films there, and they are always fascinating. They're just often incredibly irksome, but they're immensely influential and for good reason in a lot of cases. This one I just could not stomach.
Sounds delightful.
Then I also had a movie short, Carolee, Barbara and Gunvor. This is by Lynn Sachs. Just last year this one came out. Very short, it's about 8 minutes, and it's a portrait, 3 portraits of 3 experimental women filmmakers, all kind of advanced age at this point. It's on a movie at the moment, and it's kind of been put up as a tribute to...
Oh, she just died, didn't she?
Yeah, 2 of the filmmakers just died, Barbara Hammer and Carolee Schneemann.
I think I read an interview with Barbara Hammer a little while ago. She's really interested. Before she died.
They both died in March, and this is, it looks like 8mm, 3 sort of almost 3 minute each portraits of these 3 artists, and it's really, really fascinating because you get a distinct sense of them as artists, because as well as filming audio interviews with them, Sachs also shoots each of the films in a very particular style. Now I have to say I haven't seen any of the work of any of the 4 women. In fact, this is my first Sachs film, and I haven't seen any of the other 3's work. You get the sense maybe this is a reflective of how they make films themselves, but the 3 segments are very, very differently shot, and it's absolutely fascinating. They're all beautiful, and they all sort of espouse a different aesthetic viewpoint on cinema, and its power to communicate the ideas of the day, and specifically in a feminist context in this film. It's really, really fascinating, and as that kind of tasting menu, it makes me really want to dive into them. I think especially, it's a shame, I read some lovely tributes to Hammer when she died in March, and made me sort of really regret that I hadn't, as is always the case, gotten to know her work during the course of her own lifetime. But this is screening a movie, and still is for a while.
I did come across it a while ago. Brand? I will get to it, and I kind of was one of those, sometimes you note one and then you kind of slips away and you forget. So I will actually, that's a good reminder.
And just 8 minutes. It's really, really lovely. There's some terrific portraits here, and just really fascinating discussions of identity and imagery aesthetics in a way that's very light and playful. Hammer especially comes across as an absolute character. And then the last thing I caught was the IFI's Trish McAdams series, which we have discussed previously.
Launched last night.
Yeah, launched last night with McAdam herself was there in conversation with Dean Kavanagh, and that was...
Just out of curiosity for listeners, how long is this running?
This is for the next 3 weeks, I think.
Yeah, to the 25th of May, I think.
Yeah, to the end of the month.
Plenty of time to actually sell.
Yeah, there's a lot screening. I think there are a total of 10 films across a few different programs. There are a lot of shorts here. McAdam's been making shorts since the 80s. I have to say this is my first exposure to her work. So I kind of went along in curiosity, not really knowing what I was going to get. And last night's program, she commented herself that it was interesting, the choice to launch with these. These are 2 recent shorts, 2015 and 2019. Actually, the second was a premiere just this year. Strangers to Kindness was the first one. It's this formally really fascinating short where it begins with McAdam herself narrating a story, which begins with her living in a tenement house in Dublin in the 80s and deciding that she needs to escape. So she flees for the States to sort of spend some time with a friend she had previously made in Dublin. And then it just goes into this anecdote about meeting a guy outside a bar and getting into his car and him driving somewhere and it getting increasingly strange. And it's told in this really odd animation style, which is sort of 2D cutouts, but animated in a 3D style, and also interweaving that with some animated shots from Google Earth and Street View, and a lot of McAdam herself, like looking at a screen that has these things there. It's really playful and interactive in that way. There's also an actor then portraying the young McAdam, but also recounting a story that was hers herself, so it's kind of cross-generational. And it dives into the technology that separates these generations, but also the experiences of certain types of creepy behavior that links them. It's really fascinating, and a combination of score and pacing made it really uncomfortable. It takes a very, very slow approach to describing this one incident, and it's skin crawling. Squirming in my seat, extremely uncomfortable. Where is this going? What's going to happen? Which is interesting because you have the two subjects narrating the film, so you know that
there's a limit on how.
Yeah, exactly. That there's sort of a bar that
or ceiling. Or floor.
But it is the most creeped out I've been in a cinema in a long time. Very, very effective in that way. And the second film, then, the one that premiered this year, is called Confinement. I think it showed at the Dublin Film Fest, but I missed it. This is just half an hour long, and it begins as this, again, actually starting in the same tenement building in Henrietta Street. McAdam sort of sets out wanting to explore the history of the street and the sort of Georgian layout of a lot of Dublin's architecture. It begins as this sort of, with the same animation style, I should say, the same animator worked on both films. Starts out as this sort of architectural curio about how you can trace social history through a city's layout and how that evolves. And it begins talking about kind of key figures of Irish history. You go into your classic, O'Connells and everything. And then it takes a weird sidestep and begins talking about, it very suddenly lurches almost from this discussion of sort of classic Irish nationalism to the people left behind, which I think is something Irish film's been exploring. A lot of Irish shorts and experimental cinema especially has been exploring in really fascinating ways in the last couple of years, as we're in this decade of centenaries, as people keep calling it. And McAdam does some really fascinating stuff with this. She has got a score from Roger Doyle, the noted Irish composer, and has done her own sketches of actual images of mental health inmates, and there's this weird procession of montage of their faces slowly fading in and out of each other while the score plays over it, that again is really, really affecting in the way that the previous film was kind of quite horrifying. She sets mood very, very well. This program together, I have to say, really got me excited about what's to come. The next 8 films in the program over the next couple of weeks.
Nice.
She's a really fascinating filmmaker, and it's interesting to think that we're going to kind of cast the net back to the 80s next, going forward. We're looking at her present work now, so it'll be interesting to see what that's come from. Yeah, because the digital technology plays a huge part in these films. Yeah. So I'm interested to see what happens once we start dipping further back, and I'd really recommend people go along to the other films.
Yeah, I'm away this week, and I'll probably miss some of it, but if there's more towards the end of the month, which I'm hoping to catch, because again, we don't see this kind of stuff very often, so I'll be definitely at some of it, and people should get along.
All right. That include the 2 films on Letterboxd. Deadly. Jay, what have you watched since the last we talked?
I'll kick off with a short on Mubi as well, actually, now that Ronan's kind of kicked that off.
Get us Mubiing.
Indeed. It's a Josephine Decker short, who is kind of being talked about now because the release of Madeline's Madeline, which is a movie release
this week, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know if Ireland has it, but it should be out.
It's in the calendar, so we'll be talking about it later.
Yeah, But
think.
so Mubi are releasing in the UK. I'm not sure if they're releasing in Ireland, but they released in the UK as part of their Mubi Go, and so they have a couple of things coming up from her, and one of them is this short called Me the Terrible from 2012, which is an absolute goddamn delight. It's 12 minutes long, and it's about a young girl who sails into New York Harbour in a pirate costume determined to take over the city, and from that, that's like a little jumping off point. Her and her teddy bear kind of go at this city, and she rocks up at the Empire State Building and Statue of Liberty and conquers in this kind of visually expressive and wonderfully shot kind of low view of her kind of heightened almost kind of thing, and it's really great. It's so much imagination. There's really wonderful kind of, like, there's a bit where she kind of is climbing up the Empire State Building. You see her standing at the bottom of it, then she takes a step, and there's this kind of really deliberately clunkily animated kind of climb, like in the 60s Batman style. And there's windows across like a building in a kind of vertigo kind of style. It's not vertigo, rear window style. You're looking at the thing, and then there's some good vertigo references, really nice little film references to kind of how cities work and stuff like that. And all that's great. And it goes at this kind of stuff for about 8 or 9 minutes, and then it takes a bit of a kind of darker turn. And the ending kind of is really good and really surprised me at how kind of affecting it was, because it built up a lot of character in the preceding kind of 12 minutes. It's really, really good, really delightful, really playful, really smart, and like it does so much with so little, because there's precious little to play with here. Like, it's just imagination and smarts, and I really liked it. I know obviously Mubi, I'd absolutely recommend it.
Yeah,
12 minutes of your day is that.
Definitely
It's Alicia Diaz, I think is the name. The kid in it, who's again these days, she's fantastic, absolutely fantastic. It's like, as soon as you see her, it's like, yeah, I want her to win. I hope she conquers everything. So which is, casting is very important, particularly with kids and these kind of things. Very, very good, absolutely recommended. Also on Mubi, which I wanted to catch and I did finally catch, is the Art McKay film, The Picture Game, which is shown alongside Donald Foreman's The Imagist, which is my, I think, second favourite film last year. And this is his father's film.
The Scannain Podcast and says his fourth favourite film of the year.
Yes, indeed, we're smart people. So McCaig is his dad, and McCaig made kind of documentaries for, I think, French TV mostly, in Northern Ireland. And this has this kind of I don't know, have you seen this Picture Game? Yeah, okay, that's grand. This has this kind of really interesting kind of historical context and kind of up to the present day, and this was made in 79, I think, so it's up to the present day as then. And covers the usual kind of like the hunger strikes are mentioned, not the hunger strikes, but the Bloody Sunday gets mentioned and various other things that and like there's no kind of like, McCaig is very partisan, he's very clear where sympathies lie, and it's the Republican movement, and historically, I mean, there's a lot of reason for that. I mean, like, an original thing was the defence of communities and whatever, and protection from human rights and
I think we talked about.
And all
I think we talked about this in the podcast before, where it's when you are entrenched with a group,
yeah,
it's inevitable that your sympathies tend to align with that. From your perspective.
So that comes across like. But what's really interesting about the film, to my mind, anyway, and what McKay gets at, and really fits really nicely with Sinead O'Shea's One Brings the Sun to Be Shot, from my mind, is the kind of economic disparity between communities and how that's going to bite you on the ass at some point. And O'Shea is unluckily and luckily in terms of our documentary, but unluckily in terms of what's happened in the last few weeks in Derry, tragically. Yeah. Like the kind of, if you watch One Brings the Sun to Be Shot, the whole thing of like that kind of community being absolutely ignored, because there was this big bountiful kind of thing planned that promised post-Good Friday Agreement for communities, and it didn't touch Derry in the way that it should have, and certainly in the communities that she visits. And I think this almost seems like the first run of the same kind of ideas of like where like there's a sectarian issue and there's an economic issue, and they go hand in hand, and you can't exclude one from the other in terms of how people live and what do you expect people to do and what do you think people will do with 10 or 20 years of this kind of thing, and it's deliberate economic kind of policy. I mean, this is not like this. It
doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't, and it still doesn't. And you get things that happen in Derry because this kind of stuff has gone on. And McCaig is very good at this. There's footage that he has is remarkable. The editing and particularly the songs chosen are absolutely outstanding.
And I think it's crucial that kind of stuff you wouldn't have without a partisan perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. You wouldn't get access to it, and you wouldn't get to use it. And that's
so these things are sort of invaluable historical documents that, you can disagree with their politics all you want, but
it doesn't mean it's not important. It doesn't mean it has a tale to tell and an important one. And a lesson to be learned, because plenty of this still applies. I mean, it really does. Yeah. It's very, very good. I really, really liked it.
It's really fascinating to watch with hindsight because in a way it looks like a vision from a whole other world, and at the same time there's not a lot different there.
Yeah, and over and over the cycle of this kind of thing starts, begins, and ends, and we'll see it again. I mean, even today, like there's kind of talk of Stormont talks about power sharing resuming, and here we go again, so on and so forth. And this kind of stuff keeps going. But until people are treated actually equally, you will get kind of
this sense of unrest.
Yeah, and that's going to happen. I mean, and McKaig is saying it, Sinead O'Shea's films say it, and this will continue to be very, very good though. I really liked it. We went back to the Columbian Noir again because the weekly Columbian Noir on the Criterion Channel. This week's one is Drive a Crooked Road, which is really great title. This is a Richard Quinn Quine. I don't know how you pronounce it. I'm going to go with Quinn. Starring Mickey Rooney of all people.
Oh wow!
A terrific role. He's this kind of mechanic and / amateur race driver, like in a kind of races in California, I think it is. And he's driving these races, and there's a couple of guys standing there watching the race, going, who we kind of get to help us. Like, we get the guy in front. It's like, no, the guy in front's going to get endorsed, he's going to get famous. When the guy's chasing him in second, that's really hard to grapple. There's Mickey Rooney coming along in second, right? So he works in this mechanic's office, and so this girl kind of comes in with a car saying, my car's broken down, can you fix it? I was asked to ask for Mickey Rooney's character. And he goes to fix the car, and she makes eyes at him in that kind of femme fatale way that film noirs do, and he's helpless. And Mickey Rooney's quite small, and like, even the guys mechanics he's working with are all big, tall guys, and he's kind of squatting up like this, and it's and Rooney gives a loads. He underplays it really well, and but he's lovelorn here. Like at this stage, he's quite clearly the patsy, and he's quite clearly lovelorn in that way. And it's this kind of brilliant little story of like, listen, he's going to be the hoist driver. This is what we need him for. And he kind of slam dunk him into it. And there's complications ensue and all that way. And
it's always the little guy who gets screwed.
And it's kind of a darker ending than expected. Like it kind of plays out and ends really well. Like when you get a point where you go, the film should end now, and the film ends now. I really like when that happens. It doesn't happen often enough, I have to say. But Diane Foster, who's the kind of femme fatale, is very, very good. A lot of vulnerability, but lots of shade as well. Really liked it.
These all sound like they're absolutely classic noirs that hit all the beats exactly where you want them to, which is enjoyable.
I've only watched one that's kind of a bit of a mini dud, but even that was kind of, that had its pleasures. But it had its pleasures in it. But everything else has been an absolute treat, and they're all around the 85 minute mark, so you really can't go wrong.
Are we talking like early 50s here?
We're talking, it's a bit of a kind of from the mid-40s, I think, up to 60, so it's kind of a bit of a cover.
It's a good spread,
I think the last one was the latest one, is 61, I think, and it's about 2 hours and 10 minutes long. Yeah. So I'm building myself up to that. Damn. But yeah, and also in advance of a film I saw this week from a new release, you may guess it, I rewatched Iron Man 3. I like Iron Man 3, and I liked it on rewatch. It's, as I described it on Letterboxd, it's a superhero film dressed up as an 80s style action film.
Which is great,
its essence. And it's great fun.
Surprising little actual Iron Man in it. There's there's a sequence where Stark takes down a mansion with a gun in the style of like Lethal Weapon.
But Lethal Weapon's perfect entry, because him and
Rhodey in particular have this sort of...
and it's in a classic scene, turn up at the docks with guns in the very classic 80s style of the action film, or the A-Team, or whatever you want, like. And there's the Christmas scenes because it's shade black. The action is tremendously well staged.
The banter is good as well.
It is. No, it is. It's and the voiceover from borrowing it from Kiss My Man,
Robert Downey Jr.'s introductory.
It's really good and very playful and all the rest of it. And I like that Pierce is a great tech bro asshole bad guy.
And he's aged remarkably well.
He has, And he has it, and he's actually a good bad guy in the sense of like, that worked in 2013. It very much works in 2019. Like,
it's
very much
outcast nerd who is afraid that nobody
and remakes himself.
Who remakes himself into
the alt style guy to the alt right.
That's it exactly. He's now wearing a suit. He's got bleach blonde hair.
I wonder who that reminds me of. Like. Yeah, it's there, it's all there, like, and I really like
and
that.
the misogyny that runs through it. I think Grace pointed out that he's made his profit off the back of work done by a
yeah.
woman, but even the way in which he literally objectifies Pepper Potts.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. No, but it's really good in that regard. There's a lot of good playing it. The Mandarin stuff is fantastic, and the only way you could have ever done something like that, I
possibly
imagine,
the best stuff that Marvel's ever done. The best sort of plot element that a Marvel film has ever had.
And somebody tweeted at me to say that they should bring the Mandarin back, and it's like, I would be happy to see that, no matter how difficult that would be. But
so you mean this version of the Mandarin?
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to see more of that, please.
Yeah.
No. But I want to see some variants of how do you play that again, or bring it out. I could see that.
Something genuinely subversive like that.
Yeah. It's good, and
it's clever, and it works.
Kingsley's very good.
Yeah, and it's aged very well as well in terms of this idea of like the war on terror and all this of manufactured performativity, which ties into the masculinity thing as well.
And really interesting thing I think about the Kingsley performance, I have to say, is it's not an apology, but it's certainly a nod towards his Gandhi kind of stuff in terms of
with whitewashing.
Yeah.
Like well.
Of like, I'm an actor playing this, but I also was an actor playing this.
Yeah.
And it's kind of reflexive and smart in that way. I really liked it. It's really good. I kind of forgotten huge chunks of it, which was kind of a nice surprise when I watched it, because it's not that long ago.
James Badge Dale's in this.
Yeah, James Badge Dale is
James No Badge Dale.
With his skinhead and his smouldering looks.
It's not that long ago in time, but it's like 15 movies ago.
Right, exactly. And I think that's why ages it in that way. Like that feels like.
But it is also like 6 years ago in time, which is like that was
not that long ago.
That was a long time ago.
It feels like a long time ago in many ways, though.
Yeah, these have been a long 6 years.
They really have.
But it was great. Really good fun.
Yeah. And possibly the best Marvel movie starring Robert Downey Jr. and B, the proper place to leave that character, I would contend.
Well, it depends on how you define starring the Avengers. First Avengers movie is the best one for me, but I take the point. It's certainly in the top 5. Yeah. 2 more. One is Varda, of course. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce the French version, so Along the Coast it's called on Letterboxd, and I'll take that. I'll take that out. Thank you, Letterboxd. This is bizarre and really weird. This is like a 26-minute film. Ostensibly made for the French Tourism Board, who gave her the money to make a film about the Côte d'Azur and the French Riviera and all the cities like Cannes and Monaco and all the rest of it.
It's not a bad strategy.
No, it's not. I mean, if I was Dublin, I'd be giving Trish McAdams some money to sell Dublin, will you? Do something like that. That's the kind of thing you do. So she takes the money and runs with it. She makes this kind of odd and beautiful statement about the kind of endless possibilities of life, and then the possibility of ending of life, and because it kind of hits on this point, kind of you get the early kind of stuff of like lovely panning camera shots around statues, and then cuts to women lying on the beach, so statuesque and all the rest of it, and it's like a playful Varda of really nice camera work as per. But then it kind of cuts to like a graveyard on the coast. It's the most beautiful graveyard in France, and you see beautiful water while you're walking along these beautiful graves. It's like, what? Hang on, this is a tourist thing? And it's like, I think they were like, this like Lenny Abrams and doing Frank is like, are doing the horror ones. Little Stranger. Yeah. You're not going to get a horror film, right? This is that kind of thing. You're going to give me a tourist video, but this is not a tourist video, right? It's a Varda film, like, you know that, right?
Of my films.
Like, now 58, I suppose she unawares at that stage, then you made a few, but
Turkish Airlines gave Ridley Scott how much?
Exactly, right? But she does this kind of stuff that, she frames everything in that way she does. Yeah. There's a cut to, I'm not sure which town it is in the Côte d'Azur, of a party. Of a kind of festival party with kind of joint head kind of characters, like kind of papier-mâché kind of stuff, like, and men aggressively thrown what it looks like rice into women's faces. And honestly, this scene goes on for 2 or 3 minutes, and it's the most aggressively weird party scene I've seen since The Wolf of Wall Street. Oh, it's incredibly strange, and I was like, Varda's like, and she really zeroes in these guys kind of get into it in a way that's kind of like, you see this, right? Really strange. And there's just such a little beautiful melancholy end to it. Like, I was like, how the fuck could she do all this in 26 minutes in 1958, aged probably 20 something? Yep. It's remarkable. It's like, how is this just a tourist board knockoff that turns up and like it's a 4-star film? Like it's really fantastic. Absolutely loved it. And that's like, listen, we're both Varda fans here, so we're kind of like, but this is really, really good. And I put it off for a while because it's kind of, I read the tourist part, so I was like, it's going to be fun with everybody.
Very cynical,
I'll get to it somewhere. It's like, this is bonkers.
I love the idea of a Varda cash-in.
Yeah, exactly. She's sold out.
That's what this is. This is as much of a cash-in as there is.
AKA somebody gave her a budget,
which is what's actually happened. But great. And one more before I finish, and I finish at the top of the tree here, is I finally got around to Jeanne Dielman. Chantal Akerman's legendary film from the year of my birth, 1975. I didn't watch this on Filmstruck when it was on RIP Filmstruck because 3 hours 21 minutes. Like I didn't find time for Filmstruck by the way. I was heartbroken, but the Criterion channel came back and they still had it. So I was like, finally I cleared the space Saturday morning. It's like, right, I'm gonna watch it 3 hours 20 minutes. Let's do it. I don't know if anybody knows the story of it, but it's Jeanne Dielman, who is this widow living in this Parisian apartment who lives there with her son who's gone for most of the day, comes back, he's a student, and comes back in the evenings. It's set over 3 days where she cooks, cleans, organises shops, and in the afternoon turns a trick to make money. And that's the plot. So you get the first day lasts about an hour, the second day lasts about an hour, and the third day lasts an hour. And it maybe a little bit more added on in around it.
Yeah.
This and the Claire Denis, Beau Travail are the only two films in the Sight and Sounds 2012. Best Hunter films directed by women. There's two. I like the
watched them in
the one.
5 hours, I believe.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, 5 hours took me to watch them all. Beau Travail is great. I really liked it. It's a 4-star film to me. It's probably not quite as good as I was hoping to be, even though I thought it was really, really good. So coming to this, I was like, let's hope this is better. This is one of those films, and one of the very, very, if not the only film I've ever given 5 stars to on one watch.
Good Lord.
It is stunning. And I mean stunning. There's this kind of horror show of domesticity running through it, where the first day everything is just so all organised, bedspreads, things prepped for dinner just so, and there's like you get that kind of thing of somebody that's both organised and kind of hiding a mania for life or something or anything to happen. A little dead inside, so it's almost robotic in the kind of actions. You get to the second day, and there's 3 points in it during the second day where you could pinpoint. Now, I've read a few bits around it where something might start to unravel, and depending on your reading up and how you watched it, it adds amazing things. Like she starts making kind of these kind of veal kind of, I don't know what you do when you bread veal, like, or whatever, but she puts flour out and egg and she splashed the flour on the counter, and it kind of goes all over the place. And it's like, it's really, after watching something so neat for about an hour and 20 minutes, it actually is a really kind of horrific, violent kind of act, and kind of changes how she sees or acts and everything else. And there's these moments where she's sitting at the table and her facial expressions show absolutely desperation and weirdness and sadness. And like there's a repeat shot of her doing dishes, and it's from behind a little kind of sink, and you see the kind of rack to the side of it, but you don't see any of the dishes. You see her back, and she's washing dishes, and it kind of aggressive. The sound design is amazing, and the sound design under the kind of water and stuff being washed, it's like literally somebody drowning. There's that kind of feeling of, and the first day it's all perfect. The second day she's pulling plates back in because she can't get bits off it and stuff like that. So there's this kind of desperation, and desperation comes up a lot.
Yeah.
It's incredible. The framing in it is just sensational. This apartment feels huge and small and tiny depending on what's going on. There's a lift that she takes up and down to go out to go shops. The lift is this kind of frame that's kind of, she's all boxed in, and even the camera boxes are in just by how it's filmed completely all the time. The lift is like an absolute tomb a lot of the time. It is honestly, like, I was hoping it'd be great, because, I'd heard great things about it, but it exceeded expectations beyond that. It is top tier. Akerman, I've only seen 2 Akerman films, this one and News from Home, which I adored. I will be watching more. Sensational.
It's just about the strongest recommendation I've ever heard from you.
I was stunned. I'm absolutely stunned by it.
Yeah, I've been meaning to watch this for years at this point.
Run now, Ronan. Just then I won't watch. I will watch it again. I look forward to watching it again. I'm hoping next time I watch it on the cinema screen, because the depth of kind of framing and stuff, what's going on in this frame, I really want to.
For listeners who want to follow up on that, where is it available at the moment?
Criterion Channel.
Criterion Channel, perfect.
So get your VPN in order. It's fantastic. I mean, good Jesus, fantastic.
Wow.
There you go.
So follow that, and apparently I will.
Go on, Darren.
So relatively quiet weekend, long weekend-wise. Watched a bunch of stuff, was home with the family, so got to do the annual Picking of the Mooney, or the semi-weekly Picking of the Family movie night. But I did rewatch Tremors, actually, which was the big surprise. This is from 1990. I feel so old.
Aye, right.
I'd always associated this as being an 80s action movie, right down to...
The 90s is the 80s action.
It's got the coaster, it's got the little aftermath. You know, the wall hasn't fallen yet. You know, the Soviet Union still exists. So, I mean, it's a
cusp.
Yeah, it's the cusp.
Yeah.
But kind of just watching it again, and you can see very quickly and very immediately why you assumed or why I remembered it as an 80s action movie. You know, denim, white shirts, cowboy hats. But even beyond that, the sort of like retro kind of 50s nostalgia, the stuff that you saw in Back to the Future, where it's this small town in America that's menaced by some sort of external force that's threatening to tear them apart. And sort of done in this sort of playful way. It's a delight. Absolutely love it. I'm always really, really glad when I see something that I loved as a kid and it still holds up. And, well, first of all, it's not awful. But second of all, it's actually really good. Which is kind of very refreshing when you sit down and watch that.
It's been a while since I've seen it, but the last time I watched it was probably about 5 years ago. I really, really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed it more in some ways because I could really get into the kind of pulpy, kind of B-movie elements of it.
It's completely unashamedly a B-movie. Like, this is the thing where we live in the age where everybody's sort of homaging and referencing sort of B-movies, and it's become sort of standard that you have these major cinematic releases, which are very strange. Like, you have this weird thing where let's remake Paul Verhoeven films as PG-13 movies, which involves stripping out every aspect of them that, you know, makes them recognizably Paul Verhoeven movies. But you have even in the good examples of modern B-movies, there's this sort of like sanitized quality where it's like, okay, well, you have to follow the Save the Cat template and impose arcs and have structure that we recognize as like belonging to good films.
To make people happy.
To make people happy. Sort of to produce something that's mass culture and sort of like friendly and acceptable. What's interesting about Tremors is that it is completely unashamedly a B-movie through and through. Some of that's exploitative. There's a moment where the female lead loses her pants for a solid 30 seconds just because that has to be in there. Of the time, very much of its time.
Yeah.
But even like little things that are great fun that you'd never get away with in a movie today. Stuff like Fred Ward's catchphrase of "Pardon my French," or the recurring motif of the two lead characters playing rock, paper, scissors as a process of decision making. That's very much very heightened, stylized, and very unashamedly
Ward and Bacon
silly.
are great together.
Ward and Bacon are fantastic, and it's great that they never really explain the age difference between them. It's just sort of taken for granted. It's really good fun.
I liked it a lot.
Liked it. It's Jaws in the desert. What more could you want from it?
Not a lot more.
And then Mooney Family Movie Night. So first we watched The Old Man and the Gun, which was my 23rd favorite film of last year.
I haven't seen this.
I really like this, but I know you're not a Lowry fan.
I'm not the biggest fan, no, because he's made 2 terrible films. But I did like Pete's Dragon.
I was going to say, okay, whoa, okay. This is very much in the style of Pete's Dragon as far as that stuff goes. Okay. It's no ghost story. It's this affectionate farewell to a screen icon. It's got this sort of like Americana feel to it that's very loving and very longing. Yeah. It's the story of the last outlaw to a certain extent. It's this romanticizing of the outlaw as an American figure.
And a perfect choice to play it.
And again, Robert Redford.
Historically, filmically, and all the rest of it.
Yeah, because Redford sort of personified that. I mean, it's set in 1981, but it's shot in the style of a 60s film.
Yeah.
Right down to little details like the use of blue and the heavy saturation on film, the font and the yellow text and stuff like that. It very much screams kind of 60s cinema, which, you know, normally I'm wary of nostalgia. I find a little bit cheap. But I mean, this is Redford's possible swan song.
Always said there's rumors of other things coming up, but
yeah, well, I mean, there is also at least one other movie that was released starring Redford after this point, even though it may have been filmed beforehand. But I mean, it's what's remarkable about it is it has that sense of, and it very much reminds me of a lot of the successful movies or a lot of the better movies that cover this sort of ground. In terms of thinking of Catch Me If You Can. You have this romance of the American outlaw, but you also have this strange melancholy underpinning it.
Yeah.
So you have this juxtaposition of this idea of a person chasing freedom at all costs and enjoying the luxury of freedom. Like, Redford is this charismatic screen presence. Characters throughout the film cannot help but remark how happy he seems. And that's, again, you're talking about the perfect role to play that. Redford, like, you know, obvious exceptions like All Is Lost, and even in All Is Lost, he doesn't seem as, like, frustrated or confronting of death as another actor might seem. But Redford's always had this persona that sort of relied on comfort and relied on ease. Yeah. And you see the smiling face and you sort of trust him. And the film leans into that. But at the same time, it does that while not shying away from the consequences of that in a very surprising and candid way. It allows Redford to be the lovable rogue, and it paints Forrest as this adorable figure, and it very much romanticizes this idea of freedom that he chases, without necessarily glossing over the consequences of his pursuit of that freedom to other people. And it's very similar to Catch Me If You Can, which does something similar with its own, with Frank Abagnale's sort of pursuit of his own freedom and the consequences that sort of flow from that. So I really, really enjoyed it. And if you haven't seen it, I would wholeheartedly recommend that.
I haven't, and I may watch it.
All right, cool. If you like Pete's Dragon, it's much closer to that than it is to something like Ghost Story. I also did not care for Ghost Story, but I did not hate it as much as
Grace.
And then Blockers was the Mooney family movie night on Sunday, which is fascinating.
How many times have you watched this?
I have seen this 3 times, which is great fun.
I really liked that. I've watched it twice. I really, really enjoyed it. It's very funny.
It's more affecting, mature, and sincere than any movie involving butt chugging ought to be.
Yeah.
It leans rather heavily on the chemistry of its 3 leads, but it also has a really fun and engaging script and a really good secondary cast as well. The teens are really good, work really well together, and have a very naturalistic sort of chemistry to them. And it's also structured in an interesting way in that it's a really sex positive movie, which is remarkable. Again, I think we talked about this in the podcast in the past. The irony that the way to preach sex positivity and the way to sort of reach people in America may, obviously stuff like Moonlight is very important and that sort of stuff, but ironically stuff like Blockers probably has a wider reach. This idea of preaching and stuff like Love, Simon as well. Yeah. The idea of seeing that sort of attitude reach the mainstream, which is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, the bigger reach.
That's it exactly, and sort of broader appeal. And it's kind of fascinating that it happens in raunch comedies, which have traditionally been sort of very prone to stuff like slut shaming and stuff like that. Yeah. Very conservative, very prone to make jokes about rape and sexual assault and stuff like that. So it's fascinating to see that reclaimed. I mean, there's this as well. There's Bad Neighbors 2 or Neighbors 2, depending on where you are, which also deals in that in a sort of a similar way.
Yeah, and it deals with its own first film in a very interesting way.
Yeah. It's really good, and it's really great to see. And Blockers works in large part because of that. It's very much a movie that's aware of the idea that a bunch of parents setting out to stop their daughters from losing their virginity is a very creepy premise. And it pivots that in an interesting way. The decision to have one of the daughters gay, and to therefore have her father trying to stop her losing her virginity to a man because he can see that, is a really clever narrative device which brings up a lot of sympathy and allows the audience to kind of get on board while also acknowledging all the neuroses behind it. I thought it was very clever. Kay Cannon, fantastic. She worked on the script as well.
Yeah. And also has naked Gary Cole.
Which is what more could you ask for?
What more could you ask for in life?
That reaction shot from John Cena, I know it's not the most mature or highbrow comedy moment, but I laughed so much in the cinema that my sides actually ached. Senna is not the greatest actor of his generation, but he gives these great reaction shots. Senna just has that natural gift.
I liked him in it. I really enjoyed him in it.
Yeah. And Leslie Mann as well is very, very good as well.
She's
always very good, and it's glad to see her sort of given the lead role. And then finally, similarly along those lines, I'll talk very briefly about this because it's coming out in a few weeks, but I saw Booksmart on Monday, which is Olivia Wilde's directorial debut.
Very much looking forward to this.
Which I really, really liked. Again, it's a similar sort of movie. It's a teen comedy. It's about 2 girls who have studied really hard in school and discovered that, all that study meant absolutely nothing because all the kids who were partying also got into these prestigious universities, and so they feel like they've wasted the previous 4 years of their lives, and so decide to make it up over the course of a night. Standard template. A series of episodic adventures occur after that point. Sort of they go to various other parties, they encounter various other people, and again, it's your standard American sort of comedy setup. It's episodic, it's rough. It's got that sort of teen party stuff like Project X or Superbad, which is the most obvious influence. The casting of Beanie Feldstein obviously evokes that. It's got this sort of going away to college, sort of people feeling antsy. Again, Lady Bird, the casting of Beanie Feldstein also evokes that, but things like Say Anything. And even that sort of structure of characters stumbling from one comedy setup to another, in search of a party, which is everything from Office Christmas Party through to what's it called? But you get the example. You get
being loaded
the night before. Yeah. What elevates this is a number of things. First of all, the script is very, very sharp. Wilde herself is very good. The direction is really great here. There is a tendency with actors directing for the first time, and particularly on high-profile sort of prestigious projects, where you have sort of 2 extremes. You have a tendency to push it so far in a way that says, look at me, I'm directing. This sort of really awkward compositions which are designed primarily to showcase the fact that they're complex. I'm thinking, for example, that shot in, A Star Is Born, where Sam Elliott like stands up and walks out of the tent
ridiculous.
and has a conversation with him purely so Bradley Cooper can say, "Hey, look at me, I'm directing."
It's ludicrous.
He's directing here.
Yeah. But you also even have things like actors who are more heavily influenced by their previous collaborators. I'm thinking, for example, like I would argue, and I know this is going to be controversial, Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach, for example, on Lady Bird. But even things like, you want to pick an example of Cooper again and Eastwood. Where you can tell like A Star Is Born was very much an Eastwood project, and you can tell looking at it that it was that. That sort of thing. Or even like Ryan Gosling and Nicholas Winding Refn, for example, on Lost River.
Yeah, you can certainly tell that already.
You can tell that. Wilde is confident and comfortable directing this in a way that's just incredible to watch. There's no real sense of drawing attention to the stuff that she's doing. She just does it remarkably well. And a large part of that is down to the casting of the two leads. Beanie Feilston is great as the nominal lead Molly, the character who's driving this, the stock comedy character. But it's Caitlin Dever, who is the breakout as Amy, her best friend. Dever, you may know from Short Term 12, which has proven to be quite the talent factory.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, really, really good. I would wholeheartedly recommend that. It's coming out in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'll definitely on watching it.
All right then, so let's move on to talk about the week in film news.
Hit me.
All right, so it's probably a bunch of little news that sort of rolled up into a snowball. Lots of Quentin Tarantino stuff happening recently.
Sure, of course.
I could tell the enthusiasm. Yep.
I'm on the record.
The Hateful Eight released on Netflix as a 4-part miniseries.
Released as a miniseries.
On Netflix, yep. A lot of discussion.
Recut?
It happened, recut. It happened very subtly without any real announcement. A lot of speculation about what exactly was involved in this. Turns out Tarantino not only gave the project his blessing, but also guided the editing of it as well. And there's rumour and speculation that he may be doing something similar for Django.
Do we know who actually edited it?
We do not, I believe, at the moment. But we do know that Tarantino oversaw it. And it's interesting because he'd argued for doing something similar to Django, so it's strange that he started with Hateful Eight.
Okay.
But his plan is to go back and do Django for Netflix.
Have you looked at this?
I am not at a chance. Jesus, Ronan, I'm just one man. I have to watch 26 episodes of Japanese anime by Sunday.
Oh, well, of course.
I mean,
I'm kind of half intrigued by this because, The Hateful Eight is dreadful.
Hateful Eight is amazing. Best movie of 2016.
No, not by any stretch of the imagination. It's not a good film.
Ronan,
it's not.
I realize opinion is subjective. But
it isn't.
You're wrong.
It's
not
a terrible
remotely.
film. I'm sorry, I wanted
dreadful.
to like it, but it's not good.
Django Unchained I really, really like until I really, really don't. Hateful Eight I hated throughout. And I think by the end, actually, I was okay with it, but it's not good. And I'm intrigued to see what changes he makes, because I think Tarantino has a tendency to not recognize his own weaknesses. So I feel like this could be worse.
It's good.
And there's more likely to be
Apparently,
longer.
it's very similar to the Roadhouse cut, which is my preferred cut of the film. Yes, I have a preferred cut of the film.
Mean?
As in, like, the scenes that have added, most of them you've already seen before. I think there's only about 10
Oh,
minutes.
because there was the thing about if you saw it in 70, you got extra scenes, because Tarantino's that kind of purist.
Don't we all love those guys?
You say purist, I think you mean asshole.
Yeah, pretty much.
But
hey, 70mm is lovely, but don't be a dick about it.
Well, now you can watch that without 70mm. Now it's on Netflix. Now it's democratized. What?
Now I'm a purist.
But yeah, so no. Aside from that, late entry to Cannes, which was the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, actually made the cut, so to speak, quite literally and figuratively. Apparently, he was editing down to the last minute, which should fill everybody with confidence.
Well, that's always amazing, because I always thought he just left every scene in.
No, I think in fairness to Tarantino, well, not in fairness to Tarantino at all, in fairness to Tarantino's collaborator, Sally Menke was a good editor for him. She did very, very well. Her loss, obviously, is tragedy for various reasons, but it has also, I think, considerably weakened his films. He has seemed to get himself, I think his current editor was assistant editor under Menke, and just doesn't seem as good as saying no. The editing is noticeably weaker since the loss of Menke, I think, in his films.
And finally, it looks like his Star Trek film may yet come to fruition. He's announced that as his film,
No, it won't.
following on from.
I bet serious money it'll never happen.
I suspect it won't either. But let me have this, Jay.
Enjoy, Darren.
Come on, can you imagine the internet's reaction to a Quentin Tarantino Star Trek film?
I want it to happen, and I want it to count to the 10, and I want him to go away.
They freaked. Oh, it doesn't count. It's not part of the quote canonical 10.
It's just ridiculous. Stop.
Any more than Kill Bill 1 and 2 are separate films?
I had to buy 2 tickets, and both of them were too expensive for what I got.
All right, but yeah, so
Ronan's going all in here.
Yeah, I'm relentless with this.
He's just saying Quentin, but yeah, no, okay. But that said, I'm quite looking forward to it.
That could be fascinating. A Star Trek Tarantino film would be one that would actually get me interested, because I think he in the past has done really well with adaptations.
And within sort of genre stuff as well. He famously directed episodes of ER, to pick an example, but also even CSI, which was probably was the best episode of CSI. I've seen far too many.
I could see like the N-word popping up in Star Trek. Which that terrifies me. Things like that. You know.
It should also be pointed out actually that
Paramount should send to the film jail or San Quentin.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Boom. How would you like that?
Worth noting as well.
Can't see Jay's eyebrows.
I'm very happy with that.
I'm very happy with you for that.
Thank you, Darren.
But I mean, it's also worth noting as well that like most studios you think would know better than that would be like, okay, Quentin, we're going to.
You would think that, but does anybody say no to Tarantino?
But also, this is a Paramount film.
Yeah, who will do anything for money?
And Paramount,
did the last Star Trek film not do enough money or something to say that they're trying something weird like this?
Look what they've released. Paramount will release anything.
But the issue with the last Star Trek film is the two Abrams movies made a lot of money. They also made fans very angry. So what you got a third film which was less good but more pandering to fans.
Sure.
And made less money.
Never pander to fans. They're idiots.
It's a shame. It's a grand movie. It's just not as good as the first two, and obviously it didn't break out for similar reasons. But it's fascinating because there were actually two separate Star Trek films in development. There was supposed to be a Star Trek 4 starring Chris Hemsworth, but then apparently Chris Pine wanted a raise,
so they gave to Chris Pratt.
Can you imagine how Star Trek fandom would react? Your new Kirk.
Please don't be Chris Pratt. Anything. Stop making Chris Pratt a thing.
But yeah, so apparently, according to the actors, they're looking forward to working on Star Trek 4. According to Paramount, they are not looking forward to paying for Star Trek 4. The plan was that there would be Star Trek 4 and Quentin Tarantino's Star Trek film.
Yeah, no.
But as far as it's happening now, the only one that is happening in inverted commas, and being honest, I will believe it when I buy a ticket, sit down, and the movie actually plays, is Quentin Tarantino's Star Trek.
Yeah. Same.
But anyway, so in terms of other news that's sort of happening, there's not really that much. The nominations are in for the Writer Guild of Ireland's 2019 ZeBBie Awards.
Did they get in?
Which are named in honor of Oz Whitehead to acknowledge the best scripts written by Irish playwrights and screenwriters during the previous year. Nominees. There's some great
nomination in here for Boy Saint, which I've banged on about plenty on this very podcast for best short, I believe.
Tim Spears, I believe, yes, for best short film script as well. In terms of feature-length scripts, the nominees are The Dig, which I don't know if you guys have seen. I've seen it. I quite liked. I liked it a lot. Black 47, which I think we all quite liked.
God bless you, Pierce.
I really, really loved. And Float Like a Butterfly, which is out this week, and we'll probably talk about it a little bit later on. But
it's very new skewing, isn't it?
It's very recent skewing, yeah. Black 47 is really the only sort of one from like last year. That's without the past couple of months.
Good to see.
Which is great. And amazing to see the success of Black 47, which is now on Netflix. And you can download and watch that at your pleasure.
In one part.
Not 4 parts, unfortunately. But yeah, so that's all right, let's move on to the top 10.
Yes.
And wow, that was very enthusiastic.
I know, right? I've been practicing.
Have you actually seen a movie in the
I've
top
seen
10?
one.
What? Oh, you have?
I'm a good boy.
Oh. All right, stay tuned for Ronan's review of Endgame. Why are you laughing, Ronan?
Ronan, all right. We depend on this.
At number 10, Shazam.
Shazamant, I'm afraid. I have not seen this.
It's fine. It's got a really good first 2/3 and a fairly mediocre CGI-packed, overlong
so like every superhero film.
Kind of, but with it turned up a little bit. And I like the first 2/3 a lot.
All right,
how do you turn it up?
You just make
how much more up is there?
You make it run for 40 minutes.
These ones go to 11.
And I wish this one goes to 40 minutes. And it's like, it's fun and it's charming and it's at its best when it's small and then it goes big and it doesn't really work. And it's a shame because there's a lot of good stuff in there, particularly about how maybe middle-aged men should let kids enjoy superheroes, which is a lesson I think we could all take out. But hey, here's one that I think at least 2 of us can agree on. Greta at number 9.
Made top 10.
It did. Was that in there last week as well?
I can't remember. Last week's a long way away.
But yeah.
Greta's great.
It's Greta.
Complete nonsense, but it's great fun. As good nonsense goes, I had an absolute ball with it.
I did. I'm looking forward to rewatching it. Again, this is movie family film.
I can see you watching it with people and going, oh yeah, okay, what are you talking about, Jay? This is shite. Or whatever. I can see the kind of... But it was one of those kind of things I was watching. It's like, yeah, you should be in the surprise film. Yeah. Instead of 2 hours and 40 minutes of shite from fucking S. Craig Zahler. Anyway, but yeah.
Keep it positive, Jay. Keep it positive.
Yeah. No, Greta's very good. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, it is. It's a delight from beginning to end. It was a welcome sort of bomb.
Jordan on great genre form, and
Yeah.
he's good at that. Like, he can zip through this kind of stuff, no bother to him.
It was a late Saturday night film as well. It came after two rather, sort of like maybe not ideal films in terms of watching, so it was a nice bomb.
That's a very positive, not ideal is a very positive description, Darren. Well,
They were rubbish. You're allowed to say it.
Nothing but a
Two
dipper.
words, shit sandwich.
You guys were at one of those.
Can
Was
you
I?
say that?
Which one was it?
Dreams of a Life?
That
No.
was blue.
No. What's the one, the animated one about the war in
God.
Liberia? Was it Liberia? Liberian Civil War?
What is that
I felt
called?
like I actually
Richard
was at it.
Kapuscinski one. Another Day of Life.
Another Day of Life.
That was
Sorry,
not good.
apologies. Yeah.
It's terrible.
It was not ideal.
It certainly was not ideal.
All right, at number 8, it's Wild Rose, which has done phenomenally well.
That's a really good showing for it.
€400,000, which is
Great to
great at the Irish box office for an independent
That's
film.
pretty good.
With
God bless Jessie Buckley.
Yeah, and she's
I know
starring in
who's sailing her.
Chernobyl, actually, which is on Sky Atlantic now. I'm hearing
okay.
great things about.
I wouldn't rush in to see it.
It was in the
Jeez,
Ukraine,
that's
actually.
shut up, Darren. Don't ruin my pun. That's my second pun.
Sorry.
Jesus.
It does star the other Sarsgaard, though, so, it's got that going.
There's always a SARS card.
There is
There are
always.
9
it's
of them.
by law.
How can there be the other one?
There's so many of them.
Yeah. At number 7, are you talking to me, Jay?
That didn't make the top 10.
It did.
Would you stop?
27
Who
grand.
went to see this? Identify yourselves at once.
I've heard it's good. I've heard
No,
good.
you haven't.
What? Hold on.
You've heard it's
haven't
better
heard-
than the Hobbit films, which is a meaningless thing to say.
It's a biopic of somebody that's,
It's a
boring.
story of love, friendship, and fellowship, Jay.
Oh, I hope that's
Because
not is that
that is the tagline.
I've never seen this on that. Just on that tagline alone, I've never seen
It actually
it.
does.
Stop it, film.
You can tell that we don't have the rights to Lord of the Rings, but it's like, let's get it in there anyway.
Here's
Oh,
some
my
common
stars,
words.
This
Yeah.
sounds dreadful. I've never seen this.
Oh,
I have no interest in this whatsoever.
I would watch everything that's gone before and probably go after before. I see
If
it.
you were walking into the cinema, you'd Nicholas Holt before you bought a ticket, right?
Holt and Catch Fire.
There we go. All right, at number 6, inexplicably, it's still Wonder Park, which has earned €500,000.
Directed by
I
Blank.
mean, I'm not. I normally try not to laugh at films, but I feel like
Irish
this kind of
people
deserves
and
this.
animations are just weird.
Just
Stop buying tickets for a Creeps film.
I mean, like, is it worth checking in and seeing how it does worldwide at sort of
No,
box
don't
office
depress
mojo?
me. If it's
I mean-
150 million, I'm going to cry.
What? Hold on. Do you want to take a look and take a bet at this? Actually, like, how
200
much do we think?
million.
200 million. You're thinking 200 million.
I
Ronan?
have no idea.
Guess
I don't
1
know
million,
how the
don't ruin
world
it.
works.
Okay, actually, surprisingly, it's only earned 45 million at the US box office and 66 million worldwide.
4/5 of that.
How
in
much have we
Ireland.
So
kicked
I'd
in?
say so. We've kicked in $500,000,
Oof.
which is quite
Damn.
proportionally above our weight. Although to be fair, this happens occasionally. We did it with was it 1 in every 50 tickets for A Star Is Born was bought in Ireland,
That was bizarre.
which is
What
strange.
were you doing?
What a strange world.
We
What a
like
strange country we
we
are.
like our Bradley Cooper apparently.
We like our musicals.
Yeah. At number 5, it's Big D Dumbo.
Darren, stop saying that. It upsets me every week, and I forget every week, and then you say it again, and it upsets me anew.
Again, I kind of don't hate this, which is remarkable. I mean,
no,
it's
not, Darren.
it's flawed, it's clumsy, it's awkward, it makes all the mistakes that you expect a movie like this to make, but it's also got a little bit of prime, sort of like slightly anti-Disney context in it, which is great, because, I mean, there was that tweet that went around, I think Ronan shared it earlier on, about like Disney's plans that run straight through 2027. So Disney own everything now,
They own you.
including, according to Dumbo, criticism of Disney, which feels like it's appropriate.
Ugh.
Yeah.
I've only just realised that Tim Burton went from big eyes to big ears.
Boom.
I don't think we're going to beat that. So at
Very
number
nice,
4, The Curse of La Llorona. I'm going to not do that again. We're going to call it The Weeping Woman from here on out. All right, so the Curse of the Weeping Woman, directed by Michael Chavez, starring Linda Cardellini. It's the horror movie in the Conjuring verse.
Oh, somebody make it stop.
Versus.
It's perfectly solid, which is exactly what you want in terms of recommendation.
No, it isn't.
It
I want more than that,
Oh,
Darren.
thank you, Jay.
Sorry.
Um,
Just so we're clear, I want better than merely solid. I want better than that.
It's perfectly solid, Jay.
yeah.
It's grand.
It delivers exactly what you expect from a
Alright,
film
okay.
like this in terms of it has a few jump scares in there. It has a nice sense of atmosphere. It has a reasonably solid understanding of what it's doing.
I'm not going to like it, are I?
Unfortunately, with that come a series of problems. It's very much like a lot of the Conjuring films modeled on 70s horror, specifically being set in 1973. So it's very much like the broad version of what Hereditary was. It's this sort of love letter to 70s horror. But that leads to other problems, including like the weird decision to have the first ethnically focused version of The Conjuring, focusing on a Mexican spirit that menaces a white woman in her home, which is maybe not the best thing you could have done.
You might have thought that
little
through
bit
with a little
hashtag
bit,
problematic.
It's a little bit. Oh, it gets better. She's also a single mother as well, who has to deal with the stress of working and raising her kids at the same time. And the kids who are left alone at home, and bad things happen to them. Again, I don't think there's any malice attributed to any of this. I think it's just a result of copying a bunch of stuff that was radiating in the background of 70s horror movies.
Considering the
thinking
context
about,
of the modern world
what
whatsoever.
the difference is between 2019 and 1973. So it is a little strange in that sense.
It's almost like it's bad filmmaking.
As if producers don't care.
It hits all its jump scares. It balances its sense of humor with its sense of horror, and as an homage to this style of cinema, I think it's relatively good.
My favourite thing to do is to try to get Darren to concede that a movie isn't any good.
It's such a difficult business, isn't it? It's so difficult.
You know it.
Deep down inside, I do. No, I mean, to be honest, any movie that...
Say it, Darren. I want you to say it.
Any movie that gives us Raymond Cruz as a surly, straight-laced exorcist / Indiana Jones can't be all bad, can it?
Yes, it can. But it sounds that it really can.
By definition.
Yeah. At number 3, A Dog's Journey.
Who's the best boy? Dennis Quaid is.
You can't see, but Dennis Quaid has hitched his pants up around his nipples and is giving a thumbs up in very slow motion.
I absolutely guarantee that will be in my top 10, possibly top 3 movie moments of the year come December. It's just fabulously
I thought you were going to say
weird.
top 10 films of the year.
No, this isn't good.
There's a lot you don't know about that dog, Ronan.
It's really strange. I love that stuff like this gets made because it's just daft and weird and odd, and you're looking at it, throwing your eyes up to the sky going,
was it you who described the closing scene as Terrence Malick's Lassie?
I think that was your one. I'll give you that one. But we turned to each other in the cinema and we're like, did Terrence Malick do this shot? It's bonkers. Dancing, twirling through wheat fields, but with a dog instead of Olga Kurylenko. It's very, very unusual. And very charming at the start. Entire families were weeping, and you could understand why. It plays on the emotions in the same way Marley and Me does, but it's not as offensively gross as that film. It's nonsense. But it's weird nonsense. And it has consistently weird, and I admire that.
It's discovered that killing a dog is an effective emotional shortcut, and I admire how relentlessly it kind of commits to that.
I do genuinely worry that gives a strange message to kids. Don't worry, if your dog is dead, he'll be right along again in a minute.
Wow.
At number 2, and this is a surprise to me, and I guess this is maybe a result of comedies playing remarkably well in Ireland, because again, studios love presenting comedies here, and in fact bring over entire cast, like the Daddy's Home 2 cast, for example.
Oh yes. What a measure of quality that is.
Yeah, but I mean, even the Anchorman...
We got the cast here because it's terrible.
But because Ireland loves comedies, and because Ireland is a great sell.
We literally see anything.
But The Long Shot is in at number 2.
What the hell is that?
The Long Shot is the Charlize Theron political romantic comedy starring Seth Rogen as ANC's boyfriend, apparently. But yeah, so basically it's a story of an unemployed journalist who's battered by his own misfortune, endeavours to pursue his childhood crush and babysitter, who now happens to be one of the most powerful and unattainable women on the planet. I haven't seen this. I'm quite curious to see it. I've heard very mixed things.
I'm quite curious for you to see it too.
Thanks, Jay. Cinema date? Okay. But yeah, I've heard interesting and contrasting things. Apparently it's a very good rom-com. It's reasonably competent as a political comedy. It maybe wastes some of its core cast. And yeah, that's kind of the word on the street, as it were.
Well, they know the street.
And at number 1...
Ronan,
remember what you were asking me to do earlier. Remember how difficult you said that was. At number 1, it's Endgame.
Yes.
I was lost there for a second.
To concede a movie is not good. But
anyway, yes.
But no, Jay, you've actually watched Endgame since last we talked.
I watched it last Friday.
How was it, Jay?
Well, interestingly, I'm a huge Infinity War fan. I thought it was very, very good. I know you didn't, Darren, but that's fine. I really, really liked it. I knew, and how spoiler are we going to get here? Not very spoilery, I'd say.
I haven't
I think
seen
it's been out for 2 weeks. You can talk about the
You're not
basic
gonna see
plot.
it.
You'll
You'll have forgotten
You
everything
can-
we said anyway.
You can probably, I think, at this stage, talk about the second act stuff. I mean, the spoiler
I'm
ban.
not going to say much about
The
the end.
spoiler ban
The
is
directors
up.
have said.
I really, really like. Again, this is Disney owning everything, including criticism of Disney. It's like you've
They
been
don't own it. You can just ignore them. They're assholes.
Have you been online?
I don't care about online. They're not real people. They're just people that press buttons.
Poke them, and they're like a
Don't
fucking
poke
bear.
them. Just say something and ignore them and block them, like I do.
Alright.
But anyway, yeah. So I saw it again. Like I really like the ending to Infinity War. Infinity War, known full well what happened was
Would
going
have to be reversed.
Well, certainly going an attempt to be undone would have to ensue. I haven't read the comics, but I understand where these things go.
Also, the fact that like Black Panther 2, Spider-Man 2
listen,
are
sure,
all
right,
coming
yeah.
down the line.
All right, Darren. Let me tell it. Jesus Christ, like we know your hatred is clear and standard here at this stage. It's fine. Let me.
I didn't hate the
Don't-
ending
don't-
to Infinity War.
No, okay. Anyway, I really liked him in 4, so I was kind of looking forward to this. 3 hours was kind of pushing my kind of limit for a superhero film, but they've over 20-something films, and fans really wanted a kind of big, kind of all-encompassing end. Like,
Probably a lot
it's
to
kind of
wrap
fair
up.
enough. Yeah, there is a lot, and that's absolutely fair. So, I mean, originally this was Infinity War Parts 1 and 2, wasn't it?
Yeah.
If I remember correctly.
Yeah, marketing changed the last
yeah,
minute
yeah.
as well, and critics, I believe, told not to tell anybody that there was a cliffhanger ending to the Infinity War.
But anyway, yeah.
Anyway.
All that's nonsense.
Yeah.
But anyway, so cut to the film. Here we are in the cinema. It's an interesting film. 30 minutes into the film, I was like, right, I'm all in here. The first 30 minutes are absolutely superb. There's a particular scene right at the start involving Jeremy Renner's character, who I'm not a big fan of Renner. I don't think his character is particularly great in it. But I'm not against it. One way or another. I'm kind of indifferent.
Yeah.
But the scene is absolutely
It's phenomenal.
superb.
It's
It's
the
one of the
best
best
scene
things
in the two.
Marvel have done
Yeah.
in quite some time, I would argue. One of the best things
I'd
that
probably
Russell's
say it's the
done.
best thing in the two films, and probably the best scene the Russos have directed.
I'd have to think about that. But
Okay.
yeah, I really, really liked it.
Yeah, it's
so
very
it's kind of
effective.
like, I'm in here. This is really, really good. And I like the idea about like
With you.
what you are pitching, what exactly they're pitching over. It really worked for me. And then we get to the kind of the middle of the film, which the middle of the film is quite long. The middle of the film is about the length of a film, in essence, like, and
That's very well put.
that's fine. Like in terms of like you're going to do the thing until that will set us up for the last half an hour, 40 minutes, right? So
Yeah, the last
that's
stretch.
a good hour and a half, like
Yeah.
that's longer than Varda, and that's just the middle of the film, right? So like, I was kind of stoically preparing myself for
Bracing.
to both enjoy it and hopefully make it work and all the rest of it. 'Cause that's a lot to ask of a film to do, like to kind of keep something
for that
going.
long.
And to my mind, it does not. It's really, really messy. And there's this thing where it's not going to surprise anybody to say that there's a certain spoiler if you want to turn it off, but there's a certain point where time travel becomes part of the plot,
Yeah.
right? Which is fine. They obviously something will have to do, and at the end of Infinity War, it's made clear by Thanos in the kind of one of the few last scenes where he can rewind back a certain point. So this is not
And
new
also
news.
how you undo this.
Yeah, and how you on it. Like, it has to involve some sort of going back,
Yeah,
right?
and there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
And that's fine. And it's like, I can
And
see
it
that.
also
That's
works-
how it's got to work.
And it also works in the context of
Yeah.
this as a wrap up in
Yeah.
terms of like looking back
Yeah.
nostalgically
And I'm fine with that. All that's fine.
and celebrating the success of the studio or whatever.
Problem I had with that, other than it being endless, is that it does this weird victory lap around certain points of previous films. And I think in the first Avengers, Infinity War itself, I think, actually, isn't it, as well?
No, it's Guardians of the Galaxy.
Oh, Guardians of the Galaxy.
And Thor
and
Thor the Dark World.
Yeah. So
And really cynically, because the reason they use Thor the Dark World is because they have contractual options for both Rene Russo and Natalie Portman for 3 films.
they got to use them.
And they ditched them after the second Thor film. So
So they used them for small
this.
scenes.
And noticeably,
Portman
Portman's...
got, like, just to get out of bed, didn't she? And that was
That's
it.
exact. Portman's contribution to this film was recording a single line of dialogue in a sound booth.
Yeah.
All the other stuff was done using
Yeah,
CGI
yeah,
or deleted scenes.
Which, that's fine. They do that way, and that's fine.
Yeah,
I don't really
yeah.
care. Like, I mean, that's the
Yeah,
business.
I mean, and again,
I'm not. I'm sure Russo and Portman got paid handsomely for the film,
Well,
so I'm not.
That's it exactly. And I mean, it's a
don't cry
similar
me a
thing
river
with
too much on that.
It's a similar thing with what's his face, Hugo Weaving, who played the Red Skull in the Captain America, who had a contract for 3
and then
films.
rocks up at some point.
But he famously, like, he gave an interview where he was asked, so what was the experience like? It's like, oh, it's dreadful. I had to wear all the makeup on my face. It was suffocating. I couldn't do that all day. It's like, well, aren't you under contract for 2 more films? And his response was, they wouldn't ask me to do that. Which was one of the great responses. Apparently they didn't, actually, because through the way that they do it in this film, they managed to avoid that.
So that kind of weird victory lap doesn't really work for me, in a sense that the film doesn't differentiate itself enough. Like, the scenes that go to different parts of the galaxy to do these things don't differentiate themselves enough from the films they're watching and they're emulating, to the point where I got really tired of the scenes. Like, I was like, oh yeah, we're in New York, and it's like, okay, there's Tilda Swinton doing a thing, and then, you know, and just, sorry, I have to say before I go any further, the Hulk, what in the fuck's name were they thinking? There's this, I don't know if this happens in the comics. I don't.
It is a reference to a comic book thing, but the comic book thing is...
Can we say this? This happens in the second act, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It does, right? What happens is, right, now, myself and Darren had a conversation. I watched Incredible Hulk a few weeks ago, which was the Edward Norton...
Louis Leterrier.
Yeah, film. That was kind of second Marvel film, I think.
Yes,
after
the one that was produced by Universal.
And they ditched Edward Norton and got Mark Ruffalo in. Now, I like Mark Ruffalo in the earlier films. The Hulk. I did. I think he works quite well. The kind of touchy-feely, kind of weird thing, kind of acts as a kind of nice balance thing. I could see what they're going for and why he fits to the films that they made subsequently. Here is where that naturally ends, I think, that kind of thing, where you get a Hulk Mark Ruffalo hybrid, where the Hulk is standing around enjoying clothes with giant glasses, talking as Mark Ruffalo's face.
Wearing sweaters.
What?
He's just sitting around like normally, like me and you sitting here.
He's
and
eating
the
at a
Hulk is
Waffle
this
House.
size,
Yeah, he's working at a computer.
Glasses,
yeah,
and kids come over and take selfies with him. And
Stop.
right?
Yeah, I know.
I was sitting there going, it's like, who would okay this? What kind of fucking, like, the Hulk is terrifying.
Well, it's pure fan service. It's very.
What fan would want that?
People who like Mark Ruffalo and have a Hulk fetish.
Well, you have Mark Ruffalo and the Hulk.
Yeah.
You have both of them right there in every fucking film.
And now you have both of them together.
But it's idiotic.
Oh, it's terrible.
What you do is you reduce Mark Ruffalo's acting to a CGI joke, right? And also you reduce the Hulk's anger and
what makes the Hulk the Hulk. Yeah.
You just ruin 2 actors in one go.
When you say you get them together,
it becomes your dad.
He's your dad in
yes.
Denny.
Yeah,
he's your dad sitting with Denny.
Mark Ruffalo's personality. There's a moment where, like, Ant-Man is eating a taco, which gets blown away.
And he brings out 2 tacos.
The Hulk carries out 2 tacos
in his giant hands.
Yeah.
Stop.
And it's like, it's your dad meeting you at McDonald's after the divorce kind of thing.
Except he's 3 Schwarzeneggers.
Yeah, and he's taking selfies with teenagers. Yeah. And I'm just like, who decided to ruin one of the best characters in one swoop? It's like, what we'll do? Let's destroy 2 characters in one setting. It actually angered me. I was sitting there going, it's like, my God, who would do
Jay
this?
About to Hulk out. Do you want to? Very briefly. Yeah. My take on the whole Hulk thing, and I think it speaks to a larger issue with the film, is that this weird, and I've talked about this before, but the weird fetishization of power that happens in Infinity War and Endgame, where there's this fixation on the idea that having power and using power are equivalent to one another, and in fact, having power and being unwilling or hesitating to use power makes you weak. And so there's this weird attitude that runs through. The Hulk's entire character is based on this idea of Banner being afraid of the Hulk being the monster inside himself that he's afraid to let out. I mean, if you want to read it as a personal thing, it's an anger management thing. If you want to read it as a cultural thing, it's this idea of America and the atom bomb and stuff like that. And the Hulk's traditional conflict. And if you look at things like, for example, the Incredible Hulk movie, which is not great, but stuff like the Whedon Avenger movies as well, which both include scenes where Ruffalo is this big, cuddly, as you mentioned, a very cuddly, lovable Banner. But in both of the Whedon films, there's scenes where it's like, oh shit, the Hulk is here. Yeah. And it's very much like, this is terrifying. Yeah. But even if you look at Thor Ragnarok as well, you have like Banner's like, well, if I get swallowed by this thing again, I'll lose myself. And there's this real tension and fear about using that. And then if you look at the 2 Infinity War, central conflict of Infinity War is Banner wants the Hulk. He wants the Hulk out so bad, and the central conflict is the Hulk refuses to come out. And like, so what Banner does in Endgame, and it's really strange because like, there's no sense that people actually need the superheroes in Endgame. Like, there's a conversation early on with your woman from Black Panther, Okio, I think her name is, where she's saying, it's an earthquake. you don't really need superheroes to deal with an earthquake. But like there's this thing where he's like, well, I thought what I'd do is I'd get the Hulk and Banner together so he could be the Hulk all the time, because then he'd be strong all the time and then he'd have access to that strength all the time. And there's never any consideration to the thought that maybe he might not want that strength all the time. Maybe he should be a bit wary of that.
In fairness, though, I think there's also what I would read it and how I read it is a neutralization of that strength and that anger and that kind of thing. And I think that can be read that way equally as.
Well, I mean, he does at the end, like he's used the climax in a way that he describes as it's like I was made for this. I'm not going to go into too many details.
But I think as a character, I've got control of this now, and I don't have to.
Oh, it does neutralize him.
And I think that's what they're aiming for. I just think it's a really bad way of doing it.
It's a really strange thing because you still have Ruffalo under contract. So what are you going to do with this thing?
Well,
now?
he does get a scene, so it's fine. And they have to do a thing to make the scene work, because otherwise then it's anyway.
Yeah.
Like I found the middle of the film absolutely exhausting, to the point where it gets to the end, which at the end I know Grace's kind of emotional flex to it, and I could see it, and I could see why people have that. I can absolutely see it. I could see how it works for other people. I could see exactly how.
And it's very affecting when it does. Sobs in cinema.
It didn't. I was in a kind of half full cinema in a kind of afternoon in the Odeon where nobody goes at the point. So other Odeons are available. But you know what I mean. It was I think there was about like 20 people in the cinema, so it wasn't particularly full. The problem I had is like all of that. By the time we get to the end of it, which is I don't know, whatever, the last 40 minutes or so. We're 2.5 hours in. I know that's fine. I knew where I was going to get. I didn't really mind that. The problem I had is that the first 2.5 hours or 2 hours and 20 minutes had robbed me of any kind of emotional connection to it. It distanced me in a weird way that I didn't really feel anything for the subsequent things that I should have slam dunked me, because I was kind of set up for this. Yeah. Like I bought into it in Infinity War. I bought into the subsequent previous films. I'm a huge fan of it. I think it works really, really well, and I think they really dropped the ball here, which is a tragedy. I can see how the ending works with people. I can actually, like, if you buy into the film, I can see exactly how the ending would work. I can see exactly what they're going for. Not even if you buy into the film. If you buy into the universe. I buy into the universe, and it didn't work for me. Like, I think this film has a thing that if you get on board early, I can see exactly how it would work for you. And I think there has to be a few leaps to be made to some degree to get past certain things, because there are issues. But I can see how it would work. But it just, I was exhausted by the time I got to the end of it. Like, I'm glad people got the kind of thing, because there are some moments that work really well towards the end. It's a messy but somewhat moving end. Like, and there are good things in the film. There are things I really enjoyed in the film. But it just, as an overall piece, it looked like they took on too much and dropped the ball on several occasions and made strange decisions that didn't work. I don't really agree with your take on it, and we've had this conversation of thing. I know exactly where you're coming from, but I think you're probably going full Darren X-Files obsessive thing that you do on occasion on these things, and that's fine, because you're the one that's writing 20,000 words on the fucker. I'm not writing anything. I'm writing whatever Twitter will allow me to fit into my tweet, so that's fine. I wouldn't be arsed to do it, but I kind of wished it was a lot better. And that's disappointing to me.
I'm in the curious place of, like, I really did not care for this. This is one of my least favourite of the Marvel films. This is like, I think, one notch below Incredible Hulk on my sort of ranking.
I think it's better than that. But it's lower middle, for me, if you know what I mean. It's kind of in the middle grouping, but on the lower end of it.
But it's weird, because I'm actually much more optimistic going forward. I'm actually quite looking forward to things like Black Panther 2, for example.
I can't think of it. I'm excited. No, I'm sure it'd be grand and all. I'm just...
The Eternals.
My brain is sore from... The Eternals sounds like Eternal, the band they're going to get.
The Eternals sounds amazing. It's Kumail Nanjiani. It's the director of...
The writer.
Yeah.
Zoe.
Yeah, which is... Yeah.
Well, we assume to give them enough rope and
Anthony Jolie
Marvel have pretty consistently swallowed up independent talent like that in the past. There are very few
they have,
examples
but I mean,
where
okay.
You don't have to do them.
survived.
Well, I mean,
No, you don't have to.
You don't have. I mean,
But it's not something that excites me anymore.
No, that's fine. But I'm not mourning for independent talent when a truck full of money turns up outside your house.
No, absolutely
the
not.
general
Good on them.
attitude is at least
if that
raise
gets
a
you to
glass
make
of
what
champagne.
you want
you
to
can make
next.
your own films if you want. And
you never have to work again.
But some filmmakers are distinctive enough to get a lot of it across.
Shane Black, to pick an
Ryan
example.
Coogler as well, I would
Coogler does
argue.
a great job. And even with Titi, for example.
I would argue J.J. Abrams as well.
Not Abrams, Whedon.
Sorry, Joss Whedon, yeah.
Yeah, Whedon
What they're saying. So,
with the first one he does. With the second one, you can literally see him wrestling the studio
Yeah.
and losing in
I
real time.
totally forgot he'd done a second one.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's not good. I don't like that one at all.
Thanks, Ronan.
Oh.
Yeah, no, the second one.
Join us in 12 years' time when Ronan gets to the end of the series.
I won't. I'm
I'm looking forward to
Black
Ronan.
Panther is the only one I've seen in the last 10 or so, I think. I bowed
Really
out
looking
ages
forward
ago.
to Ronan's hot take on Doctor Strange.
Oh, no. I did see 20 minutes of that, and it looked dreadful.
It is true.
I like Doctor Strange.
I know you did, but you're on your own.
Anyway, so let's move on to the upcoming releases. First thing we have to do is some business from the past couple of weeks. We have been doing a dereliction of duty. We missed a couple of the new releases last week and the week before. Ash's Purest White is currently playing in the IFI.
Yes, this is...
Great.
Yes, this is in my top 5 films of the year so far.
And mine as well, which is a rare moment of agreement
Lord,
between the
what's
two of us.
happening?
I know.
Bit of a rare sync going on over
It
here.
is, yeah.
I may have to watch this, and
You better
will probably
And
hate it.
Yeah,
just
just
about
for
things
balance,
out.
for the tripod.
Yeah, this is terrific. I wasn't a big fan of his previous film, which was
A Touch of Sin.
A Touch of Sin. It's a kind of tree-story kind of thing that works in the way tree-story things kind of work, in terms of one bit works really well.
One is really good.
Yeah.
And one is okay, and one
I'm
is
agreed
kind
on
of
that.
stretched on. I'd love to recommend it in the sense that I'd watch another one of this guy's films, but I didn't kind of work as a whole. But As Pure as White, I thought was great. It does a lot of really, really interesting things. And the IFI show, I'd be tempted to see it again. Like it's this kind of love-loss story that's really interesting. And it's so well shot, and the structure is really odd in the sense that there really isn't one. It kind of drifts all over the place in really interesting ways that I kind of really like. And I could see how it could irritate if you weren't on board, but I liked it, and I really liked the way it went.
Yeah.
And there was a lot.
It has an endearing, enchanting weirdness.
It
to
does,
it.
and it doesn't really it has a structure, obviously, a kind of underlying
Well, it
structure,
has,
but an underpinning kind of thing, the story. But how it kind of shows and what it shows and where it drifts around to are
and
always
how it allows
revealing
the
and
characters
interesting.
to wander. Yeah.
Yes, and breathe and kind of connect and disconnect. I really liked it a lot.
I mean, any movie that finds time for YMCA in modern China
Indeed.
is worth your time.
I would agree.
argue.
Wow.
All right then, and the other film we missed was last week was the release of Vox Lux, which is Brady Corbett's.
I haven't seen this.
A Star Is Born.
This is another one the movie released in the UK, I think, and because they have his previous film Child Little Bit Eater on as well, which I need to see, which I haven't seen.
And this as well as playing in selected cinemas in Ireland. I think this one is unlike other releases that we may be talking about shortly. But yeah, Vox Lux is grand. It's fine. It's got a series of great performances, in particular Natalie Portman, but also the young actor. I'm trying to think of the name. Rafi Cassidy, is that the?
If you say so.
Yeah, so it's got these these really great performances that sort of anchor it. So it's really, really good, and it works very well in that sense. It has that thing where watching it, I am not entirely sure how in it is on its own joke to a certain extent. Where I'm not sure how much is committed to actually disappearing up certain parts of its own orifice versus mocking the idea of disappearing up parts of its own orifice. So it's got this sort of like weird tension where it's got narration, this wonderful deadpan narration from Willem Dafoe. And this weird argument about pop stars being the modern like church and religion and belief system and stuff like that, which is all very hackneyed and cliche, and you've seen it done dozens of times before. And there are moments when it feels like the movie might just be being ironic about that. But there's also moments where you get an awkward sense of, oh my god, this movie actually believes that these are profound observations that it's having. And it kind of, there's a weird balance between the two that I'm not sure it entirely nails. Which is a shame, because when it's fun, it's great fun. And that's mostly when it's unconnected from profound statements about the state of the modern world, or its fear of pop music that we've seen radiating through everything from A Star Is Born, through to, to pick another example, even Bohemian Rhapsody to a certain extent with its depiction of rock music as a romanticized ideal. So that is out in cinemas now at the moment. You can still catch it. But in terms of movies that are being released this week,
What do you got?
so we have a couple that we haven't seen.
Very Pacino.
Amazing Grace.
Oh, this sounds great.
I've heard great things about this.
Yeah, it's a
This is
fascinating
the,
case.
Aretha
Shot in the
Franklin.
mid-70s and held up in, firstly, technical problems, I think, in that they couldn't work out the audio sync or something.
Then
And
legal
then,
problems then.
yeah, tied up in legal rights for years until Franklin actually died. It looks tremendous, and I'm hearing that
The word of mouth's amazing.
shoots into the greatest concert films of all time.
Yeah,
Wow.
I really want to see this.
Yeah,
and
really
the
excited for
Lighthouse
it.
Cinema actually has an exhibit up of like stills
Oh,
and
great.
sort of stuff
Oh,
from
excellent.
there as well, which is very worth checking out. So if you are seeing it in the
I
Lighthouse,
hope it lasts a week as I'm away, so I really hope it goes.
I can see this going down well. So
Yeah,
it will.
documentaries they kind of certainly the
Yeah.
kind of slightly popular kind of singer. Kind
yeah,
of,
and Aretha Franklin is as populous as
And
he
that
is.
album is sensational.
The Corrupted, which is written by Nick Moorcraft, distributed by
The Nick Moorcraft.
directed,
No idea who he is,
distributed
I'm
by
not
Entertainment Film Distributors. When a journeyman boxer's brother is
I've seen the
murdered,
trailer for this. This is the boxing British gangster film with Timothy Spall and such, is it?
Okay, I don't know. I've got no
I saw
details
a
on
trailer for this. It looks like one of those hooligan
knockoff
British films, that get released straight to DVD every year. And I saw an ad
Except
for it on
this somehow
Sky,
escaped
and
the
this is
cinemas.
in cinemas. Like, yes, stop, will you? It's Timothy Spall and somebody else, I think.
Timothy Spall, the poor man's Ray Winston.
He is, Timothy Spall. If you've seen him lately, like I think he was sick for a while, but he's got real thin.
He's very gaunt. Yes.
Very gone. So he has this kind of, his shirt and tie buttons up. It's kind of makes his head look slightly bigger.
He was
it's an odd kind of view.
No, he was in.
Because his body's quite small. Like,
it was that one with the feet, 2 feet moving or something like that, or 2 feet forward. The one with the old woman who learns how to dance and gets seduced by Timothy Spall.
Best Foot Forward.
Best Foot Forward as the lovable barge
course.
fixer.
don't get me wrong, I love Spall. He's been a magnificent actor for decades now at this stage. He props up, I don't know how many Mike Lees and stuff like that. He's great. But he does kind of have to pay the mortgage.
He doesn't have you in his Spall anymore.
He does have to pay the mortgage. So, unfortunately you end up doing tripe like what this looks like, which I suspect it is. I doubt this will get released in Ireland. I suspect this is an English/Sky Movies type release.
Also out this week, Destination Wedding, which I've been hearing good things, released in the States late last year. This is Keanu Reeves and Winona Ryder, which is the story of two miserable and unpleasant wedding guests who develop a mutual attraction despite themselves. Yeah.
Sounds like something you'd see in the 90s.
So, you're a Gen Xer. You want to relive those days of the 90s. You remember Reality Bites. See Destination's Wedding.
You say that like Reality Bites didn't just have a 20th anniversary screening.
Yeah, nobody cares. Really, they don't. I mean, if you're going to go seminal 90s films for revisiting, it's got to be like Singles or something, which actually had a cultural bounce. I mean, Reality Bites was like, hey, I'm Ben Stiller. Woo. It doesn't really sell.
We're going to take your opinion about 90s nostalgia, put a pin in it, because we're going to come back to this later.
I'm going to be slammed down by something I did.
You brought this on yourself.
I apologise to everyone I've offended in the last 30 seconds.
But Destination Wedding, I've heard interesting things about it.
Interesting, Darren.
Interesting things.
Define that. I'd like that to be defined for me now.
Do you really want me to define this? I've
yes.
heard its portrayal of Keanu Reeves' character perhaps resonates in all of the wrong ways with a certain type of modern masculinity, is what I've heard, is the takeaway that I have, in terms of being a miserable and unpleasant wedding guest.
Like me.
Not like you, Jay.
You didn't know me in my 20s, Darren. I was a miserable and unpleasant wedding guest.
Also out this week, High Life, Claire Denis.
Yes.
Cannot wait.
Really looking forward to it.
This looks bonkers. The word on this being pretty stellar. Hey, since it premiered at whatever festival it premiered at back in the day, I can't remember. So many festivals.
You've been waiting for this for quite a while. You were hoping that it'll be the surprise film at VimDiff, which turned out to be quite a surprise. Yeah,
it was actually. I'm not sure where it premiered, but it was showing at Toronto, which is September.
Yeah, it should have been in Dublin, but
no,
anyway.
I just want listeners to picture Jay sitting there in the dark before the lights.
Oh, I've described it in graphic detail.
Thinking it's going to be High Life. It's going to be High Life. It's going to be High Life.
They would never put
show
a Claire Denis
2 hour
film
40
on.
million
Not
film
a chance.
from that idiot, and he did. But this sounds great. And the thing is, I've seen a couple of her films, 2, maybe 3 of her films, I think, and I'm not completely convinced that we kind of sync as kind of
Sure.
Like I've seen Bastards.
Yeah, I didn't like Bastards very much.
And I've seen Boat Well, and I've liked them to varying degrees.
Yeah.
Up to really liking them to some, but I haven't been, there hasn't been that moment where I go,
that connection.
Oh, I can see it. I can see exactly why people love it. But I'll keep going because I'm hoping to get there, and there's some I haven't seen, and
absolutely. I'm almost quite similar actually. I didn't like Bastards very much, but I'm quite a fan of Trouble Every Day. I like it a fair bit.
I haven't seen that. I'll get to that. And High Life does sound like absolutely bonkers.
Yeah.
Paddison
in
fluids in space.
A baby.
Yeah. All sorts of nonsense ensues. I'm down for this.
Be talking about it next week, I'm sure.
I won't be because I won't be here. But you enjoy, people.
All right. Also out this week, The Rosie Project. Speaking of...
The sequel to Rosie?
Well, starring Ryan Reynolds, so that will be an interesting direction to take it.
I'm already afraid of this.
You should be. The basic premise is an unlucky in love university professor, Reynolds, creates an elaborate questionnaire in an effort to find a wife and meets an unconventional woman who doesn't match any of his, quote, requirements.
So
unquote,
Audition.
But maybe the perfect one for me. It's Audition, but as a rom-com starring Ryan Reynolds.
In fairness, Audition was a rom-com until it wasn't.
Audition's fantastic. Audition really screwed me up as a kid. I was, I think, 12 when I saw it.
Ooh, wow.
And it was like, hey, it starts out as like When Harry Met Sally and then turns into something rather different. But it does sound much more pleasant than what we're discussing right now.
Oh, Christ.
Also out this week, The Hustle, which is the gender-swapped remake of Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, starring Anne Hathaway and Rebel Wilson. All right, then.
I don't know, it's like... I'm a huge Dirty Rotten Scoundrels fan. Always have been, always will be. Steve Martin, Glenn Headley, and
Michael Caine
are a joy, an absolute joy.
Yeah.
And a Frank Oz film from 1988, and it is brilliant. It's funny, hysterically weird, and just great little cons, kind of like a kind of rom-com version of a David Mamet kind of thing, and it's really fun. I really like Rev Wilson, and I really like Anne Hathaway, so unless this is getting really bad reviews, I probably want to see it.
And directed by Chris Addison as well, who is the guy from The Thick of It, isn't it?
What? That suddenly breaks me up.
There we go.
We've woken Ronan up from
it's like...
it's stupor.
He directed quite a lot of episodes of The Thick of It, actually.
Nice.
And Veep, he went on to do quite a bit of Veep as well.
Yeah.
He's a really good comedy director.
So I'll be curious to see what the word is for this. Has there been reviews? I have no idea.
There was not a multimedia screening of this, unfortunately.
Oh, crap. That's not a good sign, is it?
All right.
Or is it a good sign? I have no idea. I can't keep up with what the kids are up to these days.
In terms of moving into stuff that we have covered, and this is something that may only be available on streaming services, Madeline's Madeline finally gets a release here. Josephine Decker's film, which you've been singing the praises of for, I think at this stage, a good year, if not a year.
I'm actually kind of like, I've forgotten what I think of it. It's been
Where did you originally? Oh,
Spoiler, Jay thinks it's very good.
Hang on, we'll see what Jay thinks in a second once he looks it up. His backup brain. In
Letterbox, by the way, who are not officially sponsored the podcast, but get a lot of product placement. Yeah,
they are my external hard drive, and I saw this at Galway, and I mentioned Josephine Decker earlier. She did the short I watched, and Madeline's great. It's a very strange story about a mother, a daughter, and a teacher, an acting teacher. The mother is played by, I think, Miranda July.
Oh, wow.
And the teacher is played by Molly Parker, who's fantastic. And the girl's name is, Darren, remind me,
Helena Howard,
who gives one of the performances of the year and should have been in the Oscar conversation. This story, it's essentially a kind of tug of war in a kind of between a mother who's kind of slightly controlling in that kind of carry way, and the teacher who wants the kid to come out of herself and has these weird, strange, almost demonic possession type scenes of kind of actors, in that kind of acting classes of, coming outside yourself and being odd and body shape movements. The cinematography is sensational. There's no real plot here, and it doesn't really give a shit about it. And it's saying to you, like, this is what we're doing here. It's going to be dazzling to look at. I think it's about 90 minutes long. I think it's not much longer than that. And we're throwing this kind of stuff at you, and you'll either kind of go with it or you won't. And I can see people going, huh? But I was thinking about it days later, and I'm still thinking about it. It's kind of glorious, and really, really wonderful. I think Movie have it from May 10th, which is
this Friday.
Yeah. I would
we're seeking out.
Absolutely recommend it. It was, I think it was in my top 10 or top 20 of the year.
Wow.
Maybe top 20 last year. I absolutely loved it. And now, do I have to put it in this year? So the confusion. This dates thing really annoys me because it was in my list last year, and I'm not putting it into my list again this year because it's weird. But Josephine Decker's a really fascinating filmmaker, and as I said, that short earlier was great. And I think another one of her older films is being added to movie in the next few days as well. So
I'll be doing my utmost to see this week.
Yeah, I would recommend it. Absolutely recommend it.
I think this says a lot about the difference between you and me, because my streaming service movie this week is Wine Country, which is releasing on Netflix on Friday, which is the directorial debut of Amy Poehler.
I'll probably watch this as well.
It has a phenomenal cast of sort of female comedians over the age of 40. Amy Poehler, Rachel Dratch, Anna Gessner, Paula Pell, Maya Rudolph, Emily Spivey, Tina Fey, Cherry Jones. That's a magnificent. Cherry Jones is a psychic, which is great, one of the highlights of the film. And also Jason Schwartzman is there for some reason.
Mm.
He's making paella.
Must be.
But I really wanted to like this. This should be a slam dunk premise. This is you're getting a bunch of very talented and very funny people together and just letting the camera roll on them. Like, again, the basic premise of the film is that they're going off to celebrate one of the group's 50th birthdays, and they're going off to Napa wine country. Well, they have absolutely no interest in wine tasting in Napa wine country. Like, again, this feels like it should be something similar to, say, the Steve Coogan and Rob Brydon's The Trip or whatever.
Or Sideways. Or
something like that. What's really strange, though, is that, like, the film works rather well when it lets the characters bounce off one another, because it has this feel of like loose improvisational comedy. Yeah. It's like watching a vacation video from a bunch of very talented people where they seem to be just riffing, where everybody has like an index card that has like, you're a workaholic, you've just been made redundant, you're a mother, you're waiting for a diagnosis, and then just sort of like play with these, bring them to a scene and bounce off one another. The only issue is that the film is so ridiculously tightly controlled that none of these people don't really get a chance to come out or play off one another. The film is weirdly committed to being a film. And it's kind of interesting in terms of it reminds you how difficult it is to do this sort of thing. Because if this sort of approach is taken and it works well, like in a lot of Nancy Meyer's films, it looks effortless. And there's a tendency to write off the like talent and skill involved in balancing all those
lightness and
that sort of thing, and how difficult it is.
I completely agree.
And what's interesting watching Wine Country is that you get a sense of how difficult that must be because the balance doesn't quite work out. So like you have this direction which feels very flat and very generic, and there's lots of white and lots of light colors and stuff like that, but it leads to this sort of washed out feel where nothing is particularly well composed and nothing is especially striking, and the scenes are edited in a very haphazard way where it doesn't necessarily flow. But you also have the soundtrack, which, yeah, again, the stock beat in this is that, the stock beat talking about films like this is that the soundtrack tells you what to feel. The issue with Wine Country is that the soundtrack doesn't just tell you what to feel. It wants to tell you when you feel it, exactly what level of intensity you're going to feel it at, and the duration it expects that feeling to last, and it just takes all of the joy out of the film and just sort of saps it out. And it all feels very hackneyed and very forced, and there's this weird sense of, there's an interesting thing happening in the film with this idea of this exploration of female friendships, in particular how we talk about female friendships in media. There's a recurring joke early in the film where the characters are like laughing at the absurdity that everybody expects a bunch of women going on a vacation to immediately have their friendships collapse into a series of fights and bickering and rows and stuff like that. And you have this wonderful tension that runs through it. The sequence with Cherry Jones works very well, in large part because it's playing off the comedy of the inevitability of this depiction of female friendship that we see in pop culture. The only issue is that it never quite lands. It doesn't have the edge that it needs. There's a weird sequence late in the film where they go to an art gallery and like mock millennials for a whole 20 minutes, and like in a better film or in a film that was like less like conventional or sort of like direct to video feeling, that sequence would play as, well, these are complex characters, you're not meant to know how you feel about them. Again, this wonderful movement that we have in modern comedy where we're starting to get a sense of female characters being unlikable in a way that we've allowed male characters to be unlikable for decades.
Sure.
But the film doesn't seem to grasp that. It's almost afraid to allow these characters to be unlikable. So instead of being, look at how bullying and narcissistic and self-centered these people are, it becomes, look at how right they are, telling those millennials that they were born with hurt feelings. It's a very strange dynamic that doesn't really pay off. And it's kind of a shame, because there's a lot to like here. The cast is really, really great in it. But again, it just...
I'll probably watch it.
Yeah.
That is disappointing, though.
Yeah. In terms of other releases, Float Like a Butterfly is out this week. Carmel Winter's new film, which is the story of Frances, who is a young traveller girl who plans being a boxer, inspired by Muhammad Ali. And it's an interesting film. It's this weird genre fusion between two extremes. On the one hand, there's this naturalistic sort of slice of life, sort of like low-key, sort of like, gritty, sort of like day in the life of sort of story, which is about this traveller family where the mother has died, the father's just been released from prison, and they're sort of brought together even though the father has no idea how to act as a parent to his two children, and they embark on a trip around Ireland that ultimately becomes sort of circular, but underscores the idea of what it's like for Frances to live in a community that doesn't respect her as a woman, and has these expectations and sort of like, patriarchal assumptions about what she is and what she can do. But also the interactions that exist between them and the settled community as well, and how tense those are.
Yeah.
And those parts are sort of interesting, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff in there. Winters, in particular, is very good at capturing this idea of the tension that exists between Frances as a woman who's in her teens, who's coming of age soon, and who's going to be expected to be married off, who wants to be more than that or wants to have a life outside of that, and which is captured relatively well and very kind of effectively. There's a bit where, occasionally it becomes a bit heavy-handed, and a bit sort of like a little bit on the nose, but for the most part it's engaging and interesting in those terms. The other thing that it tries to be is this triumphant story of somebody who uses sport as a way to elevate themselves or to kind of escape the mundane reality. Again, this is the template of many, many sports films.
Yeah.
And in fact, the film very cleverly uses Muhammad Ali in that sense, in that idea of what Muhammad Ali did for African Americans, in terms of like giving them a champion that they could sort of cheer on, and also serving as like a sort of a flashpoint in terms of like civil rights and stuff like that at the time, and using that in the context of the traveling community in Ireland, which is a minority that has suffered a lot of oppression and sort of like been subjected to some really horrific treatment. And that's kind of fascinating as well. The only issue is the two elements don't really click together in a way that works. You can kind of do the naturalistic day in the life approach, or you can do the story of like a triumphant sports narrative about somebody who uses sport to escape their circumstances and to elevate themselves and to find purpose or meaning. When you try and gel the two together, you end up with this really strange dichotomy that doesn't really work. The film, like for example, has this weird climax where the film has to have a sequence where Frances boxes at the end, and where she boxes in such a way that the weight and expectations of the entire community are upon her. But that doesn't really fit with what to that point has been a very
So it has to be a forced
observational.
plot.
It's very forced, but also even like the direction takes a shift as well. There's a moment where she's knocked down during the fight, and you can hear the voiceover in her head of like clips from earlier in the film, capturing and outlining what her journey is to this point. That feels very forced and very at odds with the more relaxed sort of more like, well, this is just how people are approach the film has had to that point. And it didn't really work for me at that point, which is a shame. I will say, however, that Hazel Dupe, who plays Frances, is really, really good. And Dara Devani as well, who plays her father, Michael, is also quite good as well. And there's stuff in there to like, it just didn't necessarily click for me.
Yeah, fair enough.
Which brings us to, finally, the film of the week.
Oh, God.
Detective Pikachu. You were talking about 90s nostalgia.
I
This
wasn't.
is so much better than it should be. I'm not sure it's good, but it's much better than it should be.
I'm sure it's not good.
Hi-oh,
I'm
indeed.
not. It may be a masterpiece.
It's not a masterpiece. It is absolutely not a masterpiece. It's a film that is, and this is very strange, it's a film that works, I think, in large part because it's oblivious to its own weirdness. When it's trying to do things consciously, it's quite clumsy and awkward. This is most obvious in terms of its exposition and stuff like that. It spends a lot of time in its opening 30 minutes outlining who its character is, who its central character is, what his history is, what his relationship is, how he manages with his father, that his mother died of cancer, and it ladles this stuff on in a way that's very awkward and very heavy-handed. I have a sense that the movie is aiming for children, a children's audience, but in a way that, like, movies don't really aim for children's audiences anymore, than the way that Pixar kind of rendered redundant. It's this movie that has no sense of nuance or sort of depth or complexity to it. It's very heavy-handed and awkward. What's interesting, though, and I wonder if this is probably a direct result of using the film's IP, right? Which is that the film seems to assume that the audience understands and knows what Pokemon are and what Pokemon do. So it doesn't.
God help me.
So it doesn't explain anything to do with Pokemon whatsoever outside of the very basics. Now, I have no real experience of Pokemon or understanding of them. I think there's like 209, maybe 309 different varieties, something like that.
There are a lot.
There are a lot of
A
them.
lot more.
There are a lot more?
There are
Okay.
over 1,000.
I'm gonna,
Oh,
okay.
God, my head
I'm gonna
hurts.
take your word for that. But yeah, so I don't have a lot of grounding. But what that means is the film assumes you have the grounding, and so it throws you into this weirdness.
So it doesn't
really
give you
well.
40 minutes of
That's it. It
explanatory.
doesn't feel like
Yeah.
it needs to explain itself, and lets like visual storytelling take you there, for example. And it has this weird sense of fun that runs through it, where again, it's running through a checklist of things you expect to see in a Pokemon film. But Pokemon is such a weird concept that things you expect to see in a Pokemon film
There's no
actually
frame of
ends up-
reference,
That's it
really.
exactly.
Yeah.
Ends up being kind of weird. And again, it's got this weird thing running through it where it has this dynamic, and again, this is very much an update of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. It is nowhere near as good as Who Framed Roger Rabbit, to be absolutely clear, Jay.
Well, of
But
course it's not, because
it-
New Friend Red Rabbit's the best blockbuster ever made.
cleverly avoids photorealistic approaches to its CGI, whether for budget reasons or simply because the production design of these characters is so strange. So it gives you this wonderful, like, surreal, uncanny quality.
I like that kind of thing too. It'll work for it.
That's it, exactly. It's almost like a computer-generated Who Framed Roger Rabbit, in that these things aren't naturalistic and don't look naturalistic.
It doesn't have to be.
And it doesn't have to be. And it gives you this strange world which looks cartoonish but rendered through CGI. Yeah. There's a panning shot at the start that tracks through nature where all of the animals have been replaced by CGI versions of Pokemon. So you have, like, pigeons or bulls, but they're, like, computer animated, like, and because Pokemon are, like, simple sprites, they're, like, little circles and stuff like that. It's fascinating. It has this sort of, like, weird elasticity running through it. And again, much like, for example, Who Framed Roger Rabbit works in large part because it riffs on film noir conventions. In particular, like, it's the plot of Chinatown, pretty much, like, with cartoons. There's a really weird thing running through Detective Pikachu where it's kind of like Lethal Weapon, but with Pokemon. And it kind of works. And in fact, the climax of the film hinges on a reference to a really successful, really popular R-rated film that I honestly never would have imagined would have been adapted in a family-friendly way. It's something to behold, and it's kind of like, I'm not sure it's good, I'm not sure it really works, but it's playful and it's weird, and I haven't seen anything like it, so I'm just gonna go with it.
Oh God, it's Venom all over again, isn't it?
No, it's
not
actually
that way,
okay.
But just in the kind of, I'm gonna be in because it sounds weird enough for me to enjoy.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it's got like this weird central, and again, it's got a lot of this. Again, it never seems aware of its own weirdness, if that makes sense, which somehow makes it weirder. There's never a moment where anybody pauses to unpack all the crazy stuff that's happening and the implications of it. And somehow that makes it better because it's just like, well, I guess this is how things work now. It is fascinating to behold. And again, because it's inheriting the IP, its world building is actually quite fascinating. There's lovely little shots of like street vendors and again, this is purely a result of like pragmatic decisions. It was shot in London for tax reasons, but because it's a Japanese film, you have this layering of Japan over modern London, which looks like a weird anglicized version of a Blade Runner in terms of aesthetics, which again, for a family film is bizarre, and I'm kind of there for it. You even have things like, you have this clever refactoring of the dynamic between people and Pokemon, where you have this idea, because again, Pokemon is this weird thing where it's like you capture an animal, and you can tell looking at this that somebody writing the script was at least like, well, that's a bit weird. So now Pokemon have to choose you, but there's a central thing running through it where none of the Pokemon in the film are captive, so they just wander free and wild. And it gives it this interesting sort of strange, surreal dynamic that kind of feels like the franchise is at least aware of some of the problems that have been baked into it from the 90s. I really like this. I didn't love it. It's not going to make my top 10 at the end of the year. I'd be surprised if it's my favorite blockbuster by the end of the month, but it's still much better than I expected from Ryan Reynolds starring as Detective Pikachu.
Can I say that there are 809 Pokemon?
Good
I apologize for the misinformation.
809.
809.
That is something else.
There were only 151 in my day.
Oh yeah, the textures on these things are amazing, by the way. There's like Mr. Mime obviously is the title implies a mime character, but he looks like an inflated balloon. It's something, and like obviously Pikachu is furry as well. My parents for some reason insisted on going to see this, and Mum left insisting that she wanted a cuddly Pikachu to take home with her.
Oh,
I know,
that's sweet.
All right, so that I think wraps it up. But if people want a bit more Ronan, a bit more Jay in their lives, where can they find you guys online?
Twittering away into the void at Baron Ronan.
Yeah, similar around that void. I hang out with that void a lot. Jake
and sometimes the void tweets
stares back at and tweets back at me. Indeed, very good.
Perfect. But yeah, you can follow me at Darren_Mooney. I co-host another podcast called The 250. This week, we're taking a bit of a week off. We're going to be releasing the remaining 7 hours, or at least 5.5 of those, 7 hours, of our Twin Peaks podcast. Featuring the wonderful Andy Hazel. We also, because we're kind of cheating on that, we have a bit of a treat for listeners next week. Next Saturday, we will have Andy Hazel in talking to us about Mary and Max. But because Andy's he's stopping over on his way to Cannes, which is pretty great. Because he's actually an Australian critic, he knows Adam Elliott reasonably well. So he has recorded an interview with him where he will be talking to Mr. Elliott about his work on Mary and Max, and also about his next project. Because I know we've been talking about this. I know we've all been very, very curious.
This is exclusive.
This is an exclusive. Thank you very much, Andy. So we'll be releasing that sometime next week around about Wednesday-ish.
I am very excited
about it. Which is very, very cool. Thank you very much, Andy, for that. But yeah, take it easy. We'll be back next week. Bye.
Bye.